It's been one of them days. Baby, my lives kept disappearing that I had set up, and then when I tried to go back, they wasn't there, and then my system wasn't moving, and it was skip jumping and tracing, and I'm like, what in the world? Then I try to delete, save pictures, and all type of craziness going on. Scooter calling, and it's just, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Hey, Cynthia, I need to run some bath water and hop in it and get prepared for a big day tomorrow. And it's just a lot going on. But God, Lord God, Father Jesus, heaven above, I thank you. I still thank you. But I'm not going to stall because it's a lot going on. And, you know, on top of, it's like they trying to do it big in Texas, and the veil is being yanked off, and it's just all over the place. I got to get caught up with Trump and his mayhem and his sneakery. He got blocked in the name of the Lord. I'm finna say in the name of love, but it was bigger than that. It was the Lord. He was trying to tamper with the voting. I mean, it's just deep. 101 judges filed complaints against Blanche. They trying to get his ass up out before he's installed. No, sir. Get him out. 101 judges filed complaints. Trump losing his mind, screaming and hollering at folk. Let's look at this one. All hell breaks loose. Let's start here. I don't feel like cooking earlier. All hell breaks loose. We know who we finna get our tea from here when it starts with all hell breaks loose, cause he be on Trump's rear end. Yeah, like a diaper rash. He be on his ass like a diaper rash, baby. And you know he already got a rash. And them parasites eating his ass up. He got a big old ass rash on his neck. The devil is gnawing on him. Gnawing on TV? Yeah, gnawing on that neck. bring that neck here. Bring it here. Gnawing on that neck, baby. Big time. Y'all hit the like button as y'all come in. I'm about to start, but I need for y'all to hit the like button as you enter into the Tea Palace. Can you do that for me? I'm trying to get back to, oh boy, is it down here? Yeah, let's go here. Let's go. Y'all ready? All hell breaks loose.
All hell is breaking loose inside the Capitol building as Donald Trump has just arrived after refusing to sign a bipartisan housing bill at a public event. Instead, Donald Trump convened a meeting with MAGA Republican senators, and he started screaming at everybody there. He said, "How dare you work with Democrats to pass a concurrent war powers resolution to ban me from invading Iran? You've made me look so foolish." Donald Trump started cursing.
You been looking foolish. See, it's doing it again. Every time I go live, it kicks me out. And, you know, it does some foolish stuff for me to have to come back in. I don't know what that's about. But let's carry on.
Resolution to ban me from invading Iran. Screaming at everybody there. He said, "How dare you work with Democrats to pass a concurrent war powers resolution to ban me from invading Iran. You've made me look so foolish. Donald Trump started cursing out all the MAGA Republican senators, and he started calling out people who didn't show up. Mitch McConnell, who's like very sick right now.
Yeah,
He
near
called
death.
out MAGA Republican Senator McCormick, who was with Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. Apparently, you had Republican Senator Cassidy refusing to even refer to Donald Trump as president and saying, listen, brother, you just screwed the United States with how you've mishandled.
Brother, listen, he not even president. He ain't even Trump. He's like, listen, brother. They mad. They mad.
Republican
By
Senator
time.
Cassidy refusing to even refer to Donald Trump as president and saying, listen, brother, you just screwed the United States with how you've mishandled your catastrophic war in Iran, and your MOU is pathetic. You're a loser. And Donald Trump was screaming back at Senator Cassidy and saying, that's why you lost your job, and I'm going to go after anybody else here who dares challenge me. It was described by insiders, and Berger's effort describes it as a total cluster.
Wow.
FUC, you know what I'm talking about right here, saying the Senate GOP meeting with Trump was not going well. It was a total cluster F. One person said Trump is mad about the war powers resolution passing yesterday, and he and Senator Cassidy are going after each other. Let's talk about what else was going on inside the GOP lunch with Donald Trump. This is what Mikhail Schnell explains. Cassidy confronts Donald Trump over the MOU, basically tells Donald Trump that you just sold out the United States. He was yelling at Donald Trump, getting in Donald Trump's face.
What?
Sources were also telling MS Now that Donald Trump went after Senator Dave McCormick for missing yesterday's war powers vote, which was successful. But McCormick was with Donald Trump in Pennsylvania when Trump was at the trucking factory. Here's what Jake Sherman is describing what went down. Donald Trump spent 90% of his lunch with Senate Republicans, railing on them for the war powers vote and saying how they betrayed him. MAGA Republican Senator Roger Marshall describes what went down as, quote, very much like a hospital board meeting when a bunch of doctors are yelling at each other, but at the end of the day, we will figure it out and get along. Voices were raised, he said, and now MAGA Mike Johnson said that he is doing an urgent emergency meeting with Donald Trump to figure everything out, because today there was supposed to be this signing of a housing bill so the MAGA Republicans can say they're running on affordability. This was a bipartisan bill that was sponsored in the Senate by Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren and MAGA Republican Senator Scott. And you actually saw political parties coming together to ban private equity firms from buying certain amounts of homes for their portfolios and to take other measures to increase the supply of housing. So Republicans thought that this would be a win. It could show that the country can work together on a bipartisan basis. Donald Trump said, I'm not signing it, and I'm not going to do anything until you pass my voter suppression law, the Save America Act. So I'm not doing anything. I'm refusing to sign it. Well, the housing bill, the road to the housing recovery, was passed by veto-proof majorities in the House and the Senate. So in about 10 days, it will become the law, regardless of whether Donald Trump signs it or not. But now the House of Representatives is effectively shut down.
Hold on. Wait, what?
That was sponsored in the Senate by Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren and MAGA Republican Senator Scott. And you actually saw political parties coming together, signing of a housing bill so the MAGA Republicans can say they're running on affordability. This was a bipartisan bill that was sponsored in the Senate by Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren and MAGA Republican Senator Scott. And you actually saw political parties coming together to ban private equity firms from buying certain amounts of homes for their portfolios and to take other measures to increase the supply of housing. So Republicans thought that this would be a win. It could show that the country can work together on a bipartisan basis. Donald Trump said, I'm not signing it, and I'm not going to do anything until you pass my voter suppression law, the Save America Act. So I'm not doing anything. I'm refusing to sign it. Well, the housing bill, the road to the housing recovery, was passed by veto-proof majorities in the House and the Senate. So in about 10 days, it will become the law, regardless of whether Donald Trump signs it or not. But now the House of Representatives is effectively shut down because Donald Trump's allies in the House got a message from Donald Trump, shut it down. Shut down the House of Representatives. So MAGA Republican Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna has led this uprising now where House leadership has been forced to postpone a rule that would allow basically Congress to function and to allow bills and resolutions to move through the House floor. And so because Donald Trump has certain MAGA sycophants leading this revolt now as well, because Trump wants his voter suppression law to be passed in the Senate, when they don't have the vote, the House has now come to a shutdown. So Donald Trump, again, refusing to sign a bipartisan piece of legislation and now forcing the House into yet another shutdown. I'll show you over here as Donald Trump was approaching members of the press while this meeting was about to take place. You'll see Senator Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, clearly doesn't want to talk to reporters. Donald Trump then shows up and starts talking. You'll see Trump huffing and puffing, though, from just walking a short distance. He's deeply unwell. Let's play this clip.
The war is going very well. As you know, we're winning by a lot. Iran
He's
is
such a
making
liar.
big concessions. We'll see what happens, but it's been very, very, very powerful. It's going very, very well.
What does very powerful mean?
Yeah, so you have Donald Trump, just so you can see how much difficulty he had breathing and speaking. Let's play this clip right here.
Iran is making very big concessions. We'll see what happens, but it's been very, very, very powerful.
So while that was going on, you had Democratic Congress member Ted Lieu saying, yeah, I think Donald Trump maybe had to cancel this because he's on a lot of medication. What drugs is Donald Trump taking? Because he seems deeply sick and deeply unwell. Here's what Congress member Ted Lieu said moments ago. Let's play it.
Thank you, Chairman Aguilar. Inflation is up. Grocery prices are up. Utility costs are up. Housing prices are up. We have a bipartisan housing bill that both the Congress and Senate passed. There was supposed to be a big signing ceremony today in the Capitol, and then all of a sudden, Donald Trump decides he's not coming to sign the bill. Well, why is that? Did he wake up on the wrong side of the bed? Is he unable to stay awake today? What's causing him to chicken out again? Is it Taco Wednesday? Or is it side effects from a drug? We don't know. This erratic behavior of the president.
Did he say Taco Wednesday? Oh wow, I love this cat.
To chicken.
Oh Lord, what I do? Taco Wednesday. Oh my God, his jokes are so hilarious when I tell you he can strike, he can throw some blows. But let's go. I'm gonna start him over. I like him. I like him. He's intentional. He's very intentional and direct. I love it. Let's go. Come on, let's go.
Inflation is up. Grocery prices are up. Utility costs are up. Housing prices are up. We have a bipartisan housing bill that both the Congress and Senate passed. There was supposed to be a big signing ceremony today in the Capitol, and then all of a sudden, Donald Trump decides he's not coming to sign the bill. Well, why is that? Did he wake up on the wrong side of the bed? Is he unable to stay awake today? What's causing him to chicken out again? Is it Taco Wednesday? Or is it side effects from a drug? We don't know. This erratic behavior of the president is very concerning. He has trouble staying awake at multiple White House events and cabinet meetings. He has clearly some weakness in one of his arms. He's got swelling in his hands. And the White House needs to come clean. What we know is there's a report saying that one person in America got this special new drug. It was a 79-year-old person who was very high profile, and this drug can only be given to someone under the compassionate use provision, meaning you do that if someone basically has a terminal illness. So we need to know, did Donald Trump get this special drug from Eli Lilly? And did he get it under that provision? And if he did, why is that the case?
Hey, man.
You had Stephen Chung,
Tacos.
the White House communications director, posted the following. Ted Lude is a dumbass. He probably spent hours laughing to himself, thinking that peddling this lie would be funny. Sadly for Ted, there's no special new drug to cure being a bitch. This is how the White House communications director speaks. I will never stop pointing out that that's not normal and that we should never have normalized this level of
That's true.
behavior
That's
at
true.
any level, yet alone in the White House. But these are sick, disgusting human beings. Going back, though, to what was going on in Capitol Hill, Donald Trump was saying, I don't like a lot of people in my party. I don't like a lot of people who were in the room with me. Here's what Donald Trump said moments ago.
We like everybody really in the room. I don't like a few people, but that's okay. I think you know who they are. But I'll give you that information someday. But for the most part, we have a really well unified party, and I said it very strongly. We have the hottest
Why is this
country
man on
in the
here?
world. We're the most powerful. We're the smartest. We're the most respected. 2 years ago, we were a laughing stock all over the world. We had a terrible group of people representing us. Every leader, just left G7. Every leader, and we had a lot of people in addition to G7, as you know, came. Everyone said, what we've done in a year and a half is a miracle. We have the hottest country in the world, and we want to keep it that way. We have more factories being built right now than we have at any point, at any time in the history of our country. And all of those factories are opening up soon.
Meet Final Draft Cloud, the new online version of the world's #1 selling screenwriting software.
I mean, he is all up on him.
Let me tell you, if there's a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after drinks with friends, it's with pre-alcohol. Look, I'm not...
But Americans can't afford homes and can't afford their rent right now. And so isn't this legislation an important thing for you to sign to help make
Tom, did
housing
you
more
hit the
affordable? Like there's a
Tom?
housing
We love the Lord here. We love the Lord. Did you hit the like button? Yeah, we love the Lord. We love the Lord. He heard our cry. But I need for you. Thank you. Y'all hit the
crisis.
like button.
And Donald Trump's like, the election's important. The Save America Act, which is the Voter Suppression Act. That's what I care about. Listen to what he says. Let's play this clip right here.
But buying a home is unattainable for so many Americans. Is this election legislation more important to you than resolving the housing crisis?
Every election is important. We're doing very well. They want a lot of communists to come in. I'm saying it a little bit differently, but the people that they're pushing are communists, and this country is not going to have it.
And I just note also, this video is now surfacing, and it wasn't really surfacing yesterday. But when Donald Trump was in Pennsylvania with Senator McCormick, who he now blames for not showing up for the War Powers Act vote, by the way, McCormick wouldn't have made a difference because the War Powers resolution passed 50-48. So it still would have passed even if McCormick did show up. Regardless, when McCormick was there with Donald Trump, you had people in this very tiny crowd in Pennsylvania calling Donald Trump a pedo and a pedo protector. I'll show you what went down. Play this clip. Also, alarmingly, we're learning about how Donald Trump and the Defense Department under Hegseth are refusing to acknowledge the very serious injuries that our service members suffered from the Iran war. They're downplaying it and trying to cover it up. Wounded soldiers and families are accusing the army of downplaying war injuries. When Defense Secretary Hegseth was asked about the toll of the conflict with Iran in March, he told reporters that almost 90% of the 400 injured American members had sustained minor injuries and had since returned to duty, but a lot of those soldiers are telling CBS that the injuries were far more serious and they're being covered up. Chief Warrant Officer Rodney Behrman's body was riddled with shrapnel in the early hours of the war on March 1st when an Iranian drone slammed into his workstation in Kuwait. Medical records reviewed by CBS show he suffered a concussion, hearing, vision loss, damage to his lungs, but the Army classified his condition as not serious, and that assessment then led to him not getting the treatment that he needed and being basically told you have to return to duty because you're not seriously injured. I'll do a whole other report on that, but while Donald Trump's behaved in this behavior, I want you to see how this Trump regime is just utterly disrespecting our troops. And of course, I talked about earlier today, the Trump regime pushing out four-star general and commander of Europe, General Donahue. Let's talk about here what MAGA Mike said with respect to the canceling of the bill signing today on housing. Here's what he said.
In the process of this press conference, President Trump announced that he is canceling the bill signing, the housing bill that you all were just talking about. He said he's canceling it until the SAVE Act is passed. All of this has already passed with such bipartisan support. Of minor importance, that it pales in comparison to the SAVE Act. What is your reaction?
My reaction is, truth of the matter, I spoke to the president for 20 minutes before I went in and gave that rousing speech to the House Republicans this morning. He and I've talked about this a lot. He has expressed the priority and the preference of the Save America Act. We share that. We passed it 3 times in the House. The latest version was passed a few months ago, and it has proof of citizenship to register to vote, and the proof of showing a photo ID when you show up to vote. Basic issues that 90% of Americans agree. 70% of Democrats think you ought to have a photo ID to vote, and citizenship to vote in an American election is already in the law.
There you have it, folks. Let me know what you think about all of this. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million subscribers, and thanks for watching, everybody. Want to stay plugged in?
Hold on. Let me hear. Let's see this.
This is what my house looks like, and I haven't cleaned in 3 months. That's because I have someone come and do it for me twice a month for right now. Hey, Lawrence.
Thanks, Jed. This is going to be John Kerry's first interview since that memo of understanding came out a week ago. I know we've all been, since that moment, waiting to hear Secretary Kerry describe his reaction to the one he negotiated versus the memo.
He don't respect nobody.
Memo, I guess, that Donald Trump negotiated. We're finally going to get that tonight from John Kerry.
I'll look forward to it. I had a front seat to watching him go through every single detail on a legal pad, so he knows the details well.
I know. You were there. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lawrence.
And now Republican senators are yelling at Donald Trump.
Yelling.
And that hasn't happened in 10 years.
Yelling at him.
That's the guy that inherited $200 million. If he hadn't inherited $200 million, you know where Donald Trump would be right now? Selling watches in Manhattan.
The man Donald Trump used to call
Fat Nick.
Marco is
No. No.
Watches in Manhattan.
The man Donald Trump used to call Little Marco is now his Secretary of State. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spent the day in Kuwait negotiating with representatives of regional governments that have suffered during Donald Trump's war with Iran. And here's what Donald Trump said about Marco Rubio's negotiating skills.
Marco is not a negotiator. I watched him Meltdown, and I'll tell you, it was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. He is not going down.
He thinks the Palestinian is a real estate deal.
And these people may even be tougher than Chris Christie.
And they wind up working together.
It's not a real estate deal, Donald.
Okay, no.
They're not a real estate deal.
is a deal. Let me tell you,
A deal is not a deal when you're dealing with terrorists. Have you ever negotiated with terrorists?
You are not a negotiator. And with your thinking, you will never bring peace. You will never bring peace.
Donald might be able to.
So Marco Rubio will never bring peace.
Well, why is he over there? Yeah.
And American voters agree with Donald Trump on that. A new poll shows 63% say that Donald Trump's agreement with Iran will not lead to lasting peace.
No.
Since Donald Trump defeated every Republican senator running against him for the Republican nomination for president 10 years ago, not one Republican senator has ever dared to yell at Donald Trump ever again. Until today. The New York Times is calling it a shouting match. And it happened in a place where you usually never hear a raised voice. Senators meet in two different conference rooms close to the Senate floor for group lunches in which the Democrats all gather together in one conference room and Republicans all gather together in another conference room to discuss their Senate priorities over sandwiches sent in from the Senate dining room. Very few Senate staffers are ever allowed in those meetings.
Why?
In my last couple of years of working in the Senate, I reached the staff level that is actually allowed in that room, and I saw actual shouting in the room exactly once for about 30 seconds between two Democratic senators who were otherwise very friendly before and after that moment. Most people in the room said later that they'd never seen anyone shouting in that room, and that included people, senators, who'd been going to lunch in that room for 30 years. Today, the shouting match was in the Republican Senate luncheon. And in a typical week, many senators don't bother to show up for those luncheons, but when an important guest is invited, that increases attendance. Today, Republicans were lunching with their most important possible guest, the President of the United States, and it was the most mild-mannered among them who found himself in a shouting match with Donald Trump because yesterday that senator voted, along with three other Republican and the Democratic senators, to help pass a war powers resolution limiting Donald Trump's ability to wage war in Iran. Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy has been voting against Donald Trump's war since Senator Cassidy lost his re-election campaign against a Trump-endorsed Republican primary challenger in Louisiana. Most of the newly brave opposition to Donald Trump on the Republican side of the United States Senate comes from Republicans who are in their final year in the Senate by choice or because Donald Trump defeated them in their re-election campaigns and Republican primaries with Trump-endorsed candidates. Last week, Senator Bill Cassidy said this after reading the 4-page memo of understanding Donald Trump signed with Iran.
So I think we had a really great meeting, and we're very proud of the party.
The details that I've seen so far look awful. This will go down as a tremendous foreign policy blunder. Iran ends up stronger. Our allies in the region are weaker. And Iran has learned that if they are willing to grab that Strait of Hormuz and choke it off, they can get the Western world to dance to their tune. I think it's a deep mistake.
Okay, so the first bit of that video that you saw that was out of sequence with what we were showing you was Donald Trump lying about today's meeting after the meeting, which was not a good meeting at all. And according to Senator Cassidy's modest account of his shouting match with Donald Trump, the account that Senator gave to reporters right after the luncheon, he didn't say anything as harsh or strong as what we just heard him say last week about Donald Trump's Iran deal, but it obviously doesn't take much to get Donald Trump shouting, and Senator Cassidy said that once Donald Trump was shouting, he, quote, matched his tone and his volume, end quote. Senator Cassidy spoke briefly to reporters after the luncheon where no video cameras were present, and he said this.
He asked, why would anybody vote for the War Powers Act? As he continued, I said, is that a rhetorical question, or would you like to really know? He said, I'd like to know. I stood and said, you have not told the American people what's going on. It was supposed to last 4 weeks, it's lasted 4 months. Our original objectives have not been achieved. And I want to know what's going on. I can't tell you that verbatim, because obviously I was speaking. But that's kind of what I've been saying all along. I'm voting for more powers until I get a briefing. At which point, as I recall, he did not particularly care for my comments. Raised his voice. I lost my temper. That's not appropriate.
That's Steve Cassidy talk.
It's the Irish youth. But I, again, matched his tone and his volume.
Oh, he might. Hold on.
Back and forth. But at some point,
he, quote, matched his tone and his volume, end quote.
Oh, wow.
Senator Cassidy spoke briefly to reporters after the luncheon where no video cameras were present, and he said this.
he asked, why would anybody vote for the War Powers Act? As he continued, I said, is that a rhetorical question, or would you like to really know? He said, I'd like to know. I stood and said, you have not told the American people what's going on. It was supposed to last 4 weeks, it's lasted 4 months. Our original objectives have not been achieved. And I want to know what's going on. I can't tell you that verbatim, because obviously I was speaking. But that's kind of what I've been saying all along. I'm voting for more powers until I get a briefing. At which point, as I recall, he did not particularly care for my comments. Raised his voice. I lost my temper. That's not appropriate. It's the Irish in me. But I, again, matched his tone and his volume, and went back and forth. But at some point, my guy said, "Okay, I'll sit down." And so I sat down and tried to de-escalate. I guess my point is, though, that the American people need to know more than we are being told. The Senate needs to know. And it does not appear, although I don't know for sure, that the course of this is going the way that we were told. And so I make no apologies for standing up to the president, if you will, trying to demand that more information be shared with the Senate and more information be shared with the American people. I make no apologies for that, whatever. And if someone tries to bully me into not asking that question, I'm not going to accept that either. I am sticking up for the American people, even if I'm speaking to the president.
When the president raised his voice at you, what did he say? Did he insult you? Or?
Something like, what does President Trump say? Oh, you lost the election, that sort of thing. Whatever, comes to mind as to demean another person.
Are you worried that using your home address for business puts your privacy at risk? At iPostal One, we can help. So, you've started your own company, but feel unsafe using your home address for business use. Not only does every customer and vendor see where you live,
y'all please hit the like button. Now, why is this keep saying device?
The New York Times reports this about the uncouth, vulgarian Donald Trump. Mr. Trump also lashed out at Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican of Alaska, who was part of the bloc of Republicans that supported the resolution, calling her a horrible person, according to senators in attendance. In not one of the reports about what happened in that room did a single senator rise to say, no, she's not, when Donald Trump called Lisa Murkowski a horrible person. And so they remain the weakest collection of people in Washington history who bear the title senator. Our first guest tonight, whose service as a senator included being the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, was never afraid to tell a president that his war was a failure. John Kerry's first appearance in the United States Senate was as a leader of the Vietnam Veterans Against the War when he testified to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the committee he would eventually become chairman of, about the horrors of combat in Vietnam that he participated in and the impossibility of the United States ever winning that war. John Kerry's testimony that day helped end the Vietnam War sooner than it would have without his unique voice in protest against that war. John Kerry's opposition to that war helped end the draft and to spare the lives of young American men who were therefore never sent to die in that war. As President Obama's Secretary of State, he continued what can be seen as his lifetime commitment to trying to save us from war by negotiating the most important diplomatic breakthrough of the 21st century, the agreement with Iran, supported by 5 other countries, that Iran would never develop or acquire a nuclear weapon. That agreement was working exactly as intended, with Iran's full, obedient compliance, when Donald Trump, for absolutely no reason, abandoned the agreement. As soon as Donald Trump did that, Iran began immediately enriching nuclear material for the possible production of nuclear weapons, something Iran had completely stopped doing thanks to the agreement negotiated by John Kerry and enforced by international inspectors who were allowed to go anywhere in Iran to find out exactly what Iran was doing, with the full support of 5 other countries who joined that agreement: China, Russia, France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and the European Union, all supporting that inspections regime that John Kerry negotiated. Donald Trump is now trying to do something alone through war that John Kerry did with the most important allies in the world through diplomacy. Unfortunately, for the United States and the world, no one with John Kerry's experience and expertise is involved in the current negotiations with Iran. Joining us now from London is former Secretary of State John Kerry. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I know this is difficult to get into your schedule. We've had a week now since the memo of understanding came out. Nothing else has come out on paper establishing any other level of agreement between the United States and Iran. How would you compare what you've been able to read in that memo of understanding to what you were able to achieve in the agreement you negotiated with Iran?
Thank you.
Well, obviously, Lawrence, first of all, thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you. It doesn't resemble anything close to what we had. It's basically an agreement that the Straits of Hormuz will be reopened. And by the way, they were never closed previously at any point in time. It had never been weaponized until now. And obviously that's a dynamic that presents itself in a complicated way for the rest of the negotiations. But the agreement that we had was exhaustive. It was the strongest, most intrusive nuclear agreement ever negotiated. And it had the greatest detail of ways in which the IAEA, the International Agency of Atomic for Nuclear, would have been able to pursue any questions at any point in time. It had inspections that were laid out with a methodology for exactly how those would go, exactly what the responsibilities of Iran were with respect to them. And all we have now is an agreement to negotiate something in the future. We really don't know what it might contain or not contain. Iran clearly has a newfound sense of power by virtue of having withstood the military assault that has taken place to date. And I think what many of us spoke about before the war started, I was actually in Florida with former Secretary Mike Pompeo. We did a joint appearance, and I was asked what we thought might occur. And I mentioned at that time, people need to be really careful in how they approach this, because Iran knows and understands and uses asymmetrical warfare as effectively as anybody on the planet. And that is exactly what we've seen play out here. So we're a long, long way, obviously, from having a genuine agreement. They are negotiating. All of what is going on, Lawrence, every bit of this back and forth, Switzerland, notice what somebody may or may not have said, where in fact the negotiations could have been avoided completely. All the president had to do was commit that he was prepared to negotiate for the changes that he really wanted as a result of Iran's behavior. And there was no sort of follow-on, or excuse me, not follow-on, there was no effort to put on the table something that said, look, here's what we really object to. These are the problems we have with this current agreement, and we're prepared to negotiate with you on that. That is a negotiation that never took place, never really took place in a fulsome way, because clearly the president really was anxious to join Prime Minister Netanyahu and bomb Iran. With, I might add, the false assumption that after weeks of being, after the Iranian people had gone out into the streets, to assume that they were going to come back out automatically and go through the loss of life that they went through as a result of that is really being presumptuous and actually was a mistake.
In Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan's new book, Regime Change, they have a detailed account that is so accurate that the White House is accusing them of possibly having obtained tapes of White House meetings, but a detailed account of Bibi Netanyahu coming into the Situation Room to convince Donald Trump to launch this war. Is that the kind of pressure that you experienced from the Israeli government?
No. President Obama was importuned by Prime Minister Netanyahu to join in bombing Iran, and he asked for clearance by President Obama to go ahead and do that. President Obama said no and refused to partake in that, thought it was an enormous mistake. But taking on Iran in the way in which it has been taken on over the course of these last months has really been a goal of Prime Minister Netanyahu, an aspiration, a wish, if you will, for a long period of time. And he's spent quite a bit of his career really, constantly hammering the Iran card rather than heeding the Oslo Accords or trying to move forward on the peace front. And that's part of what has gotten us here.
There's a line in the Memo of Understanding about the nuclear material that Iran has managed to develop since Donald Trump abandoned the nuclear agreement that you negotiated that prevented them from developing that. And all it says is that Iran has agreed to resolve the disposition of stockpile enriched material pursuant to a mechanism that will be mutually agreed upon. That goes to your point about there's nothing agreed upon here. It's an agreement to continue to talk about the most difficult things, for example, the nuclear material.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. And needless to say, there's some serious questions about what the word obliteration means, because allegedly the entire stock was obliterated several months ago and wouldn't have needed a rebombing. But we rebombed and got a new announcement about obliteration. But the bottom line remains that all of this could have been negotiated and should have been at least tried to be negotiated. You know, one of the obligations of the President of the United States is to make sure that if you're going to start losing the lives of young American service people, you need to be able to look the parents in the eye or a surviving spouse in the eye and say, we did everything possible to avoid having to do this. It is patently clear to everybody and anybody who looks at this closely. The president never did that. There was a rush to war here, a rush to a war of choice, a war which has discombobulated economies around the world, a war which has put the United States in a place of serious doubt about our bona fides, about our adherence to international law, and I think it's going to have long-term implications. It's not something we can't get beyond in the future, but it is startling. I happen to be in London right now where the climate challenges are being addressed, But I can tell you that what I hear from leaders throughout Europe and elsewhere where I've met with them is a real chink in the armor of the United States, which has worked so hard for so many years to establish a set of values by which we will operate. And that's really sad and really unnecessary to have put ourselves in this predicament. Moreover, the president went after this agreement from, I don't know, the minute he got in a campaign. I mean, this was sort of a, it was an Obama accomplishment, something that President Obama wanted to do. And as we all know, that has motivated a lot of action by President Trump to sort of undo the Obama presidency, which he hasn't done. I think he's undone his own by virtue of the rush to military action here and by the credibility that he has lost on a global basis. And frankly, the annoyance that many, many people feel for the choices he has made, which have made life a lot tougher for a lot of people, not just in the United States, but around the world.
Secretary Kerry, we have to squeeze in a quick commercial break here. When we come back, I want to ask you about the amount of money that is immediately being made available to Iran in Donald Trump's agreement after he spent years complaining about the funds that Iran was able to get in their agreement that you negotiated. And I also want to ask you if, in fact, Donald Trump's support of nothing but fossil fuels is the single biggest gift that he can give to Iran long term. We're going to be right back with Secretary Kerry. Secretary of State John Kerry is back with us. Secretary Kerry, Donald Trump complained for years about Iran being able to get funds that the United States had seized from Iran, been holding from Iran for many decades, since back at the fall of the Shah. It was Iran's money that in the agreement that you negotiated, Iran was able to get that money. Donald Trump's agreement has just seemingly limitless amounts of money, including $300 billion fund he wants to create for Iran, releasing all sorts of funds that were being held and embargoed against Iran. Also opening up unsanctioned Iran oil sales anywhere, U.S. dollars, opening up the banking system to them. But then there's this kind of giant perpetual one here, which is Donald Trump's insistence that we should never be using anything other than fossil fuels, which seems, when you look at Iran's ability to shut off the Strait of Hormuz, is the greatest gift, strategic gift you could possibly give to Iran, greatest income gift you could give to Iran long term, is to say nothing but fossil fuels, no alternative fuels that would then reduce our reliance on what goes through the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, that hits the nail on the head, absolutely. I mean, clearly, the Straits of Hormuz have now been weaponized and seized, claimed by Iran in a way that never existed prior to this. We never heard the Iranians say, if you don't do this or if you push us on our nuclear front, we're going to shut the Straits of Hormuz. It was unthought of, absolutely, completely unthought of. And I think that that's going to be a very difficult issue to completely work out, I think, to satisfaction. Other countries in the region, Lawrence, are now making provisions to try to avoid this crisis of the weaponization by one country of such a critical asset. And so UAE, others are building alternative routes by which they can transmit oil in the future. I also think that, over a long term, the marketplace of the world has really made its decision to deal with climate crisis. I'm talking about the world, not necessarily Donald Trump. But here in London right now, you're hearing unbelievable optimism is suddenly rising regarding the issue of climate, as hot as it is in various parts of the world right now, with records being broken. You are finding people who are saying, but there's technology now that's coming down the road. Batteries are getting stronger. Solar panels are capable of delivering electricity at a much lower rate than gas or oil or coal. So you're really seeing just a huge shift, and amazing opportunities are on the table. I think Bloomberg ran a story at the World Economic Forum this past year saying that you know who believes in climate change? Underneath in big letters, the stock market. And you see the stock market now responding. Several days ago, last week, an enhanced geothermal company went public, did extremely well going public, had received a $400 million loan, which was a non-recourse, unguaranteed loan. And banks don't do that with an energy company unless that energy company has an offtake that's going to pay, pay the bills, so to speak. That's what's happening on a global basis. The UAE, one of the countries that most got attacked by Iran in retaliation over the course of these past months, the UAE is building out 19 gigawatts of storage, battery storage, and they're linking their 4 new nuclear reactors to this grid together with one of the largest solar panel installations in the world, and they are determined, an oil and gas country is determined to provide firm energy that will come from renewable energy. That is happening on a global basis. And I think we're seeing an unbelievable transformation in the private sector regarding where the best dollars are spent. And CEOs of companies are not going to just go out and buy gas or oil because the president urges them to do it. They're building for this future, and the future is AI data centers, which need enormous amounts of power, and they know all that power is not going to come from traditional sources of energy. It's going to come through a combination, including potentially nuclear, which is now very much on the table because the last international meeting in Dubai in what?
Okay, I'm sorry. We got to move on. I got to hop in the tub. And let me get over here. Database blocked. And the snaps, the sugars and the sweets and
elections, another live look
in some states that was blocked too.
News coming down today, a federal judge has blocked. A lot of news to get to, but we want to stay on the topic of elections. Another live look at Capitol Hill now. The news coming down today, a federal judge has blocked a Trump administration initiative to use a revamped immigration database in order to check voters' citizenship statuses. We have this from the Associated Press with that breaking news saying a federal judge blocked the use of that federal database to check citizenship, saying that it could wrongfully purge voters. That judge ruling that the SAVE database violates federal privacy laws. This ruling comes following arguments from rights groups that the system relied on inaccurate data and risked disenfranchising eligible citizens. Now, for more on this, we want to bring in VoteBeat editorial director Jessica Huseman. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now, Jessica.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on, and this is a really important topic. First, I want to ask you more generally, what is the SAVE database? What kind of information does it rely on to check these voter citizenship statuses?
Absolutely. You know, I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the SAVE database is. Most people assume that it is one big list of everybody in the country and whether or not they're citizens. If you think hard about that, it would be impossible for the government to have such a list. What this is a list of everyone in the country here legally that is not a citizen. So that means they have registered.
So he was trying to avoid
as being
the immigrants that are here legally.
here as a non-citizen with the federal government, and they are approved to be here. It also contains people who may be here illegally and have in some way come in contact with the federal government, and they have also been placed on this list. So this is very far from a comprehensive list of every citizen in the United States. There is no list of every citizen in the United States. And so what this list is a very incomplete data set of the non-citizens that the federal government knows to be within our borders.
How good can it really be? Just popcorn.
Ooh, he trying to cheat, y'all.
Regular popcorn again.
He trying to
6 years
cheat.
ago,
He want to stay in office. Shit,
And the judge
you gotta
in
go.
this ruling said that this violated privacy laws, federal privacy laws. Which laws is this judge saying that the database violates, and what information is violating this privacy law?
The ruling references a small handful of privacy laws and rulings over the years, but it predominantly centers on the Privacy Act of 1974. And that act requires that if the federal government is going to store your information in a database, you have to be told what that information will be used for and how it will be used. And in addition to this database, the SAVE database, which continues to exist and has existed for a long time, what the Trump administration wanted to do was take all of the voter list in the country. As your viewers probably know, he spent a lot of time during this first couple of years of his presidency asking for states for those lists and collecting them. And his intention was to allow election offices across the country to query in mass their voter rolls against the list of citizens. So they are both compiling a national voter roll and then also using that to in mass check to make sure that none of those people are registered non-citizens. And so that was really the new modified SAVE system, is the use of both of those things in tandem to do bulk searching.
Oh, so that's why he fussing and cussing at people today. Going ham. He got denied. Is that what he's saying? Yeah. Trying to override the Constitution. I'm listening to some in my other ear. Yeah. That's what he was trying to do. Override the Constitution. This one.
Over America's elections. Federal judges just blocked key pieces of Trump's 2020.
He has no respect of law. None.
We have breaking news tied to President Trump's push to give himself more control over America's elections. Federal judges just blocked key pieces of Trump's 2025 executive order on elections, specifically banning Trump.
Y'all think him mad?
We have breaking news tied to President Trump's push to give himself more control over America's elections. Federal judges just blocked key pieces of Trump's 2025 executive order on elections, specifically banning Trump from requiring people to show proof of citizenship in order to vote. MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin is here. Tim O'Brien is still with us. The judge, Lisa, says this is a separation of powers issue. Tell us more.
Well, Alicia, under the Constitution, most control over elections is given to the states. And part of what the president was trying to do here through this executive order was commandeer for himself the right to decide how elections are administered in states. This is a judge that previously had granted a preliminary injunction or a block on most of the provisions that were challenged here. But here, she's now making it more permanent and saying that what Trump has tried to do through this executive order doesn't just pose a separation of challenge problem. It's unlawful under existing federal law that protects, for example, people who live overseas and are part of our military. It is inconsistent with aspects of the law that protect their right to vote. One of the reasons why is because it authorized the Attorney General to prosecute states that that were counting ballots received after Election Day, even if they were postmarked by or before Election Day. That's an issue that's live right now before the Supreme Court. right? But Trump was also trying to take matters into his own hands, and through this executive order, direct the Attorney General to actually commence prosecutions of states that have this as part of their policy. 13 states that allow this were
Hey, Tootie
among the
Montana.
plaintiffs who sued against this executive order to try and block its enforcement. So today, the chief judge of a federal court in
Trying to
Massachusetts saying in a
since,
59-page ruling,
less people,
you may
right?
not do this. You may not take for yourself the right to decide how elections are administered in this country, and say that the national voter registration form or the postcard used for military members to register, that they have to include documentary proof of citizenship before we will allow you to vote.
So what happens next?
I think the preliminary injunction that was already issued is on appeal, but that argument is not even scheduled until after the election. So today's ruling doesn't change the state of play necessarily going into the November election, but this is kind of a Tetris piece that is moving with respect to other things. I just mentioned that Supreme Court case, the Watson case, in which the whole question is whether or not allowing the counting after Election Day interferes with another federal law that defines Election Day as a particular Tuesday in November. So you've got, I think, this particular case will continue to move in ways that don't impact the election. But the larger and broader issue about, do states have to turn over voter rolls so that the national government can determine whether somebody is a citizen, or can we count particular ballots after Election Day, even if they're voted before, those issues remain very live in related litigation and in related policies.
I was about to say, they remain alive in the litigation. They remain alive on Capitol Hill right now, where the president was willing to torpedo a housing bill because he wants Senate Republicans to pass the Save America Act. They recognize it is rife with problems. It is not popular with the American people. The Postmaster General is on the Hill today and is going to have to answer questions about the administration's using USPS in order to tinker with American elections. They won't back off of this.
Using a federal agency essentially to override the Constitution, to pick up on a point that Lisa made, which is that states run elections. The federal government doesn't. The Constitution didn't give the president and the executive branch any special prominence over elections. And I think Trump is trying to seed the water here, not only to interfere with voter turnout on Election Day, which is why all these machinations are happening around direct mail and other issues pertaining to the midterms. It's that he wants to create the idea that there's malfeasance, that there are illegal acts going on, because the federal government is allowed to insert itself in state electoral processes if there's evidence of malfeasance. And so that historically has come out of the civil rights movement, when the federal government got involved with protecting black voters in the South to make sure that their ability to vote was protected. That's a very positive side of federal intervention. The negative side is if you have someone in the Oval Office who is a tyrant and wants to overturn the law and can invoke malfeasance as a way to get into different states during the midterms where he wants to meddle with the vote.
I mean, it would help explain why you don't want to pass legislation that would actually be popular in November.
Totally.
Because he's an illegal citizen. I don't know why. He don't want them to be able to vote. And he wanted at one point to use them as free labor over in them foreign countries that he had made deals with. But the friends that he thought he had, they done turned against him with this war. And so all these enemies turned allies done flipped the script on him, and all of that just done fell apart with that new world order that they trying to hold on to with this fake ass war. Let's go here. I'm trying to catch up on Uncle Bill too. Let's go.
Deserves your attention. Most of the noise, I've been
Now I'm
around
finna
long
step
enough
away
to know that
because
not
I got to
every
get in the
headline
bathtub.
deserves your attention. Most of the noise in politics, if I'm being honest with you, is just that, noise.
Y'all hit
But
the like
every
button.
once in a
Just
while,
the
something
mention.
happens on
He's
the
a
world stage
radish.
that
Yes, he
stops
is.
you in your tracks. Not because it's shocking
The Bad
in
Time
the way cable
Chronicles.
news wants it to be shocking, but because it reveals something true about the way power is being exercised in your name. And this week, something like that happened. The Prime Minister of Italy, one of America's oldest, most loyal allies, looked into a camera and told the world that the President of the United States fabricated a story about her. Now let me say that again.
What did he say?
Because I want you to sit with it. Looked into a camera and told the world that in your name. And this week, not because it's shocking in the way cable news wants it to be shocking, but because it reveals something true about the way power is being exercised in your name. And this week, something like that happened. The Prime Minister of Italy, one of America's oldest, most loyal allies, looked into a camera and told the world that the President of the United States fabricated a story about her. Now let me say that again, because I want you to sit with it. A sitting head of state, a conservative leader, someone who was once considered Donald Trump's closest friend in all of Europe, publicly called his words completely made up.
So he lied on his
foreign
friend?
minister canceled a diplomatic trip to the United States. A senior Italian official questioned whether Trump is destroying the historic relationship
on purpose
between America and Europe. And then, when given the chance to walk it back, the president doubled down. Now look, I've seen a lot of diplomatic disagreements in my time. I've had my own. But this is something different. This isn't a policy dispute. This is an ally standing before the world and saying, he lied about me. And the reason that matters to every single American is something we'll come back to in just a moment. Because the real cost of this isn't what you think it is. To understand why this moment hit so hard, you've got to understand the history. See, Giorgia Meloni wasn't just any European leader when it came to Donald Trump. She was the ally. When Trump was inaugurated for his second term in January 2025, Meloni was the only European Union leader who showed up. The only one.
Hey, Natural in New Orleans.
She flew
Y'all
to
get
Washington.
the likes up. I'm gonna have to shut it down. There's 234 people in here. Only 59 likes. What we doing?
That Italy was going
no
to stand
support
with
other
this
than one person. Let's go.
And that wasn't easy for her domestically, let me tell you.
I'm gonna step
A lot
away.
of Europeans were skeptical of Trump, and she took political heat for that trip. But she made the calculation that the U.S.-Italy relationship was bigger than politics, and she was willing to invest in it personally. Now here's where things start to get complicated. Earlier this year, when Pope Leo XIV, the first American pope, by the way, condemned the war in Iran, Trump went after him publicly, called him weak on crime, terrible for foreign policy, even said, and I quote loosely, that if he weren't in the White House, Leo wouldn't be in the Vatican. Now Meloni did what any Italian leader would do. She defended the Pope. She said it was right and normal for the head of the Catholic Church to speak against war. And you know what Trump's response was? He told an Italian newspaper, "I thought she had courage, but I was wrong." Let me tell you something. In all my years in the White House, working with leaders I agreed with and leaders I didn't, I never once questioned an ally's courage in the press for defending their own moral convictions. That's not how you build trust. That's how you break it. So let's walk through exactly what happened this week, because the facts here matter more than anyone's spin. At the G7 summit in Evian, France, June 16th through 18th, Trump and Meloni were photographed together multiple times. Video showed them sitting side by side on a small sofa, talking closely. By all appearances, the relationship looked like it was stabilizing. Meloni herself told the press afterward that the climate at the summit was very positive, no friction. Then on Friday, June 19th, Italian broadcaster La 7 aired an interview with Trump. And in that interview, unprompted, Trump brought up Meloni and said she had begged him for a photo together. His words, as reported by the network: "She wanted a picture with me so badly, I could have skipped it, but I felt sorry for her." Now, Meloni responded within hours. She posted a video calling his statements completely fabricated. She said she was frankly stunned. And then she delivered a line that I think history is going to remember. "Italy and I do not beg." Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani canceled his planned trip to the United States, scheduled for June 21st and 22nd, calling Trump's words serious and offensive toward Meloni and all of Italy. A U.S.-Italy business conference planned for Miami was also scrapped. And Giovan Battista Fazzolari, one of Meloni's most senior officials, issued a statement saying, "It's unclear whether by design or incompetence, Trump is wrecking the historic relations between the United States and Europe." Then Trump called NBC News and doubled down. "She was a big fan," he said, "but I don't want her as a fan. Those are the facts. Every American should know them." Now here's the honest truth, and it's something I feel strongly about. I served 8 years in the Oval Office. I worked with leaders I genuinely liked and leaders who frustrated me to no end. Boris Yeltsin could be unpredictable. Jacques Chirac and I had real disagreements on Bosnia and on Iraq policy. There were moments with Jiang Zemin where the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. But let me tell you something I learned very early on. The single most important thing you can do as a leader on the world stage is protect the dignity of the person sitting across from you. Not because you're weak, not because you agree with everything they do, but because the moment you humiliate an ally in public, you've changed the relationship permanently. You can patch it, you can paper over it, but the scar stays. And what Trump did here wasn't a diplomatic misstep. It was a choice. He chose to go on Italian television and belittle the Prime Minister of Italy in front of her own country. He said she begged. He said he felt sorry for her. And when she pushed back, he didn't apologize, he didn't clarify, he escalated. Now, Meloni said something in her response that I think every American needs to hear. She said, "It's a shame he doesn't show the same determination toward enemies of the West, toward leaders with whom he is far more accommodating." And here's what makes that observation so powerful. It's not coming from a Democrat. It's not coming from someone on the left. It's coming from a right-wing conservative leader who bent over backwards to be Trump's partner. That's not partisan criticism. That's an ally telling you the truth. Now let me explain what happens behind the scenes after something like this, because this is where the damage gets real, and most people never see it. When a foreign minister cancels a diplomatic visit, that's not just a symbolic gesture. Antonio Tajani had meetings scheduled, working sessions, a bilateral business conference in Miami, real economic discussions, real policy coordination between two NATO allies. All of that is now frozen. And it doesn't just freeze at the top. See, diplomacy works at dozens of levels simultaneously. You've got military liaisons coordinating base access. And remember, Italy had already been restricting U.S. access to Italian bases for operations related to the Iran conflict. You've got trade negotiators, intelligence sharing channels, counterterrorism cooperation. When the principals are in open conflict, every single one of those channels slows down. People stop returning calls. Meetings get postponed indefinitely. Memos sit unsigned. I saw this dynamic play out in smaller ways during my presidency. And I can tell you, the institutional friction it creates takes months to undo. And this isn't happening in isolation. Trump has threatened to take Greenland from Denmark by force. He's berated virtually every European ally over defense spending. He's told NATO members he's not sure the alliance would be there for them. Each one of these incidents doesn't just damage one relationship. It chips away at the entire alliance architecture that the United States built over 75 years. The architecture that won the Cold War. The architecture that kept Americans safe. And I'll tell you what keeps me up at night. Once allies stop believing in you, they start making other plans. And those plans don't include the United States. So the question everyone's asking is whether this was calculated or just reckless. And I think both answers should concern you. Let me explain. If this was strategic, if Trump deliberately humiliated Meloni on Italian television to punish her for defending the Pope, for not supporting the Iran campaign, for not helping secure the Strait of Hormuz, then what you're looking at is an American president who uses public degradation as a tool of coercion against allied leaders. That's not diplomacy. That's something else entirely. And it sends a message to every other leader in the world. If you cross me, I will embarrass you in front of your own people. Now, if it wasn't calculated, if Trump simply couldn't help himself, if this was an impulsive need to portray himself as the dominant figure in every interaction, then you've got a different problem. You've got a leader who cannot control his own instincts, even when those instincts directly damage American strategic interests. And I want you to think about that Fazzolari quote again, because it's one of the most remarkable things a senior government official has said about an American president in my lifetime. He said, Trump has managed the not easy task of making the United States unpopular across the entire European continent, damaging not only Europe, but above all, the United States. That's a right-wing Italian official saying that, not a French socialist, not a German Green Party member, a conservative from the inner circle of a conservative prime minister who tried harder than anyone to make this relationship work. When your best friends start talking about you like that, you've got to ask yourself what you're doing wrong. Now let me tell you where I think this goes, because this story isn't over. First, and most immediately, Italy could further restrict American access to military installations on Italian soil. That's been a growing tension point since the Iran conflict began, and an incident like this gives Meloni domestic political cover to tighten those restrictions even further. Her voters will support it. Second, this accelerates something that's been building for years: European strategic autonomy. When European leaders can no longer count on the United States to treat them with basic respect, let alone provide reliable security commitments, they start building their own capabilities, their own defense infrastructure, their own diplomatic channels, their own trade arrangements that don't depend on Washington's goodwill. And once those structures are built, they don't come down just because a new president takes office. Third, and this is the part that worries me most, this incident may have broken a taboo. Until now, most Allied leaders absorbed Trump's insults quietly. They calculated that the relationship with America was too important to risk a public fight. Maloney just proved you can push back and survive. Other leaders are watching. If Macron or Merz or Starmer follow her lead, you could see a cascade of public confrontations that fundamentally reshapes how the world sees American leadership. And here's the domestic angle nobody's talking about. If the president's closest international ally, someone who shared his ideology, attended his inauguration, and went out on a limb for him, is publicly calling him a fabricator, what does that tell the American voter about this man's relationship with the truth? We've got to remember something fundamental about this country. America's strength in the world was never built on the idea that other nations feared us so much they just go along with whatever we said. That's not how it worked. Our strength was built on something much more powerful than that. It was built on the fact that other nations chose to stand with us. They chose it because they believed that America, for all its imperfections, was a country that kept its word, treated its partners with dignity, and understood that shared leadership was stronger than domination. I know that because I lived it. I saw it in the eyes of leaders who came to the White House and sat across from me, sometimes angry, sometimes frustrated, but always believing that the conversation mattered, that the relationship was real. Now look, no president gets everything right. Lord knows I didn't. I made mistakes in foreign policy, and I've said so publicly. But the foundation was always credibility. The foundation was always trust. And what this incident shows, what Georgia Maloney exposed when she looked into that camera, is that that foundation is cracking. Not because of one lie about a photograph, but because of what that lie represents. A pattern of treating allies as props, of valuing dominance over partnership, of choosing ego over the national interest. And here's where I'll leave you with this. This isn't about Democrat versus Republican. Maloney is a conservative. The officials speaking out are conservatives. This is about whether America keeps its word and treats its friends the way friends deserve to be treated. The American people have always had the power to demand better from their leaders. And right now, the whole world is watching to see if they will.
I got another one. Bear with me, y'all. Come on, how is 388 people in here and I don't have 388 likes? Huh? How's that?
You know, folks, most people scrolled right past
What we doing, y'all? I ain't received no cash app. I got almost 300 people in here. Less than 100 likes. Do I need to shut it down? See, this is again taking advantage of me for bringing y'all the truth. Double tap the face of your phone device or hit those three dots at the top right corner. I will wait until y'all get them up. I was trying to take a bath. I done got out early, and y'all still doing me wrong. I think the devil is a lie. Yeah. I think the devil is a lie. Y'all better get my lights up. Somebody better tell them how to get to it and how to get to my cash app. I know you a lie. I know you a lie. Ooh, these eyebrows are pretty. Ooh, I love a thick eyebrow. Yeah, I'm drying off while y'all get my lights together. We close, but not close enough. Come on. Use your other device or whatever you need to do. I need 20 more people to hit the like button. We here for you. Welcome, America people. And we don't support egg offenders. I don't know what that is. Y'all hit the like button.
happened on June the 9th in Maine. And I understand that. Life is busy, the news moves fast, and a Democratic Senate primary. You know, folks, most people scrolled right past what happened on June the 9th
Sure
in
did.
Maine.
We was in
And I
Carmelo
understand
Anthony.
that. Life is busy, the news moves fast, and a Democratic Senate primary in a small New England state doesn't exactly stop you in your tracks. But let me tell you something.
Y'all, look at these thick, pretty eyebrows. Ain't that eyebrow pretty? Oh my God, I love a thick eyebrow. Yeah, somebody show Coolin with a thick eyebrow that's painted on how pretty it is versus that little skinny line stuff. Y'all need to balance your face off. You balance your face off with a thicker eyebrow. Get into it. Y'all are behind. Okay. Okay. I just thought I'd let y'all know. Let's go. On TV. Oh, I wasn't supposed to show them. Yeah. The thick eyebrow ain't it. Yeah. That thin eyebrow ain't it. Yeah. And if you don't want to have ink, permanent ink up there, yeah, just draw it on. They got eyebrow gel for that. Let's go.
You know, folks, most people scrolled right past what happened on June the 9th in Maine. And I understand that. Life is busy, the news moves fast, and a Democratic Senate primary in a small New England state doesn't exactly stop you in your tracks. But let me tell you something.
They're not going up. I'm going to shut down like I did earlier today.
Because when Graham Plattner, a 41-year-old Marine veteran and oyster farmer from Sullivan, Maine, won that Democratic Senate nomination, the entire 2026 midterm battleground map shifted underneath our feet. Now here's why that matters to every single one of you, whether you live in Maine or Montana or anywhere in between. Democrats need to flip 4 seats to take back the Senate majority. 4 seats. And Maine was supposed to be the surest bet on the board. Susan Collins is the only Republican senator representing a state that Kamala Harris carried in 2024. Harris won Maine by 7 points. This should be the easiest pickup Democrats have. But the candidate they just nominated to carry that fight is walking into a general election with more personal baggage than I've seen on a first-time candidate in a very long time. And whether that baggage ends up costing Democrats their shot at the Senate majority, well, we'll come back to that in a moment. Because first, you need to understand the bigger picture of what's really happening in American politics right now, and just how close this whole thing actually is. Now look, let me set the stage for you, because this isn't just about one race in one state. The United States Senate sits at 53 Republicans, 47 Democrats. That's the reality after the 2024 cycle handed the GOP 4 new seats and a comfortable majority. But here's where it gets interesting. Donald Trump's approval ratings have fallen to record lows. His war in Iran is deeply unpopular with the American people. The economy still feels broken for working families. And because of all that, Democrats have been able to recruit some of the strongest Senate candidates I've seen in years. Roy Cooper, a 2-term former governor, is running in North Carolina for the open seat left by Tom Tillis's retirement. Sabato's crystal ball just moved that race to lean Democrat. In Ohio, Sherrod Brown, the only Democrat to win statewide there in nearly 20 years, is running a special election against John Husted for the seat J.D. Vance gave up to become vice president. That race just moved to toss-up. And in Alaska, Mary Peltola, who beat Sarah Palin for a House seat in 2022, is challenging Dan Sullivan, and the early polling has her competitive. Chuck Schumer is out there saying Democrats have a clear and strong path to the majority. And this is where things start to get complicated. Because all of those paths, every single one of them, assumed that Maine was going to be the foundation, the first domino, the one race Democrats could count on. So let me walk you through what happened in Maine, because the facts matter here. Graham Plattner launched his campaign in August of 2025. Within 10 days, he'd raised $1 million and signed up 3,000 volunteers. He drew 6,500 people to a rally in Portland with Bernie Sanders. He was endorsed by Sanders, by Elizabeth Warren, by Ruben Gallego. He ran as a populist outsider, taking on the billionaire class, fighting for working Mainers who can't afford rent or groceries or health care. And the voters responded. Governor Janet Mills, who had the backing of Schumer and the entire Democratic establishment,
Good morning. Hey, Belinda.
couldn't keep up. She dropped out in April.
Thank you for hitting the like
On
button
June
if
the
you was the
9th,
one that hit it.
Plattner won the
I'm
primary
finna get ready to shut it
with
down because my likes ain't
72%
up.
of the vote. Now that's an extraordinary political story.
Yeah, I'm
And
finna
this
shut it
is
down,
where
y'all, since y'all can't hit the like button. That means that y'all not, I mean, y'all here, but I don't know what you're doing. Your ear hustling is not enough for me. I don't care about how many people is in my chat. I want my likes up. I want it to be worth my time. I want it to be worth me up at 12:42 in the mountain. Yeah, to come in and listen and don't hit the like button is disrespectful to me. I'd rather you leave. And that's real talk. People come in your house and don't wipe your feet or leave your shoes at the door. And that's the least you can do. Walk in here, pick up some socks right there, clean socks, new socks, put them on. But you leave your funky ass shoes at the door. Yeah. Making all that up in here. You can't even hit the like button. Yeah, bye.
Start to get complicated. Because all of those paths, Chuck Schumer is out there saying Democrats have a clear and strong path to the majority. And this is where things start to get complicated. Because all of those paths, every single one of them, assumed that Maine was going to be the foundation, the first domino, the one race Democrats could count on. So let me walk you through what happened in Maine, because the facts matter here. Graham Plattner launched his campaign in August of 2025. Within 10 days, he'd raised $1 million and signed up 3,000 volunteers. He drew 6,500 people to a rally in Portland with Bernie Sanders. He was endorsed by Sanders, by Elizabeth Warren, by Ruben Gallego. He ran as a populist outsider, taking on the billionaire class, fighting for working Mainers who can't afford rent or groceries or health care. And the voters responded. Governor Janet Mills, who had the backing of Schumer and the entire Democratic establishment, couldn't keep up. She dropped out in April. On June the 9th, Plattner won the primary with 72% of the vote. Now that's an extraordinary political story. A first-time candidate, an oyster farmer, defeating the sitting governor and the full weight of the party machine. But here's the honest truth that nobody in politics wants to say out loud right now. Graham Plattner is also carrying controversies that would have ended most campaigns before they started. There were Reddit posts from years back, offensive comments, one mocking a wounded Purple Heart veteran. There was a skull and crossbones tattoo on his chest that resembled a Nazi symbol. He says he didn't know the history when he got it with fellow Marines, and he's had it covered up. And then, just days before the primary, reports surfaced that he'd exchanged sexually explicit text messages with multiple women while married. Now, I am the last person on this earth
You sure is,
who
but
is
keep
going
it
to
real.
throw stones at someone over personal mistakes. I know what it's like to have your worst moments
Who is
become the only
711?
thing people talk about. But I also know this. In a general election against a 5-term incumbent with a $30 million war chest, these are not just personal matters anymore. They become strategic vulnerabilities with national consequences. And we've got to be honest about that. And that brings me to something that's been bothering me about how this whole situation was handled from the top. We've got to remember that leadership in a political party isn't just about picking winners. It's about building a team that can actually govern. And what happened in Maine tells me there were leadership failures at multiple levels. First, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee and Senator Schumer recruited Janet Mills. Now, I have great respect for Governor Mills. She's a serious public servant. But she was 78 years old, running in a cycle that was screaming for energy and generational change. The voters told us plainly they wanted something different, and the establishment wasn't listening. Second, when the controversies around Plattner started surfacing, the Reddit posts, the tattoo, nobody in a position of authority pumped the brakes. Bernie Sanders said we should focus on working families, not Plattner's personal life. I understand that instinct. But there's a difference between defending a candidate and refusing to acknowledge real risks. And third, Plattner himself. On the night he won the primary, he called Susan Collins spineless and corrupt. He said she lied about protecting abortion rights. Now, I understand the frustration behind those words, but let me tell you from experience, the independent voters in Maine, the ones who actually decide general elections, they don't respond well to that kind of language. They want someone who can fight hard and still treat people with basic respect. There's a difference between conviction and recklessness. And right now, I'm not sure the people advising this young man understand which side of that line they're on. Now let me step back and tell you what this really reveals about where the Democratic Party is right now, because it goes way beyond Maine. What we just watched was the party establishment put forward their preferred candidate, a seasoned governor with decades of experience, and the grassroots blew right through her. That's happened before. It happened with Bernie and Hillary in 2016. It happened in various House primaries. And every time it happens, we have to ask ourselves the same uncomfortable question. Has this party learned anything about the difference between winning a primary and winning a general election? Because those are two fundamentally different things. In a primary, passion wins, energy wins. This voice in the room gets the most applause. But a general election in a swing state requires persuasion. It requires reaching people who don't already agree with you. It requires a candidate who can walk into a VFW hall in Bangor and a Union Hall in Lewiston and a living room in suburban Portland and make every single person in that room feel heard. Now, there's been some quiet talk about the Maine ballot replacement provision, that if Plattner were to step aside before July the 13th, the state party could select a new nominee at a convention. Let me tell you something. That is not going to happen. And even if it did, it would alienate every single voter who showed up on June the 9th and chose Plattner with their own hands. You cannot tell 72% of your primary voters that their choice doesn't count and expect them to show up for you in November. And here's why the stakes in Maine ripple far beyond Maine's borders. Let me walk you through the math, because this is the part most people don't fully appreciate. Democrats need 4 seats, Their clearest path right now runs through North Carolina, where Roy Cooper is ahead. It runs through Maine, where they need Plattner to beat Collins. It runs through Ohio, where Sherrod Brown has a puncher's chance in the special election. And then they need a fourth, and that fourth is most likely Alaska, where Mary Peltola is running in a state Trump carried by 13 points. That is an extraordinarily narrow path. Now, if Maine is a toss-up instead of a likely Democratic pickup, the entire calculation changes. Suddenly the DSC has to pour money into a race they thought was secure. That's money that doesn't go to Ohio. That's money that doesn't go to Alaska. One weakened candidate in one state forces Democrats to stretch resources across the entire map. And when you're trying to thread a needle through 4 states simultaneously, you cannot afford a single one of them to wobble. I've seen this before, folks. I've watched election cycles where one miscalculation in one primary created a chain reaction that cost the party winnable seats in states 1,000 miles away. Georgia, with John Ossoff defending, is still competitive. Michigan has a messy Democratic primary that won't resolve until August. Every piece of this puzzle has to fall exactly right for Democrats to get to 50. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 roads that could unfold from here. And I want to be straight with you about all of them. The first road is that Graham Plattner cleans up his act, runs a disciplined general election campaign focused on kitchen table issues, housing costs, health care, groceries, the things Maine families actually lose sleep over, and makes this race a referendum on Susan Collins' record, not his own past. If he does that, he can win. Collins' approval in Maine has dropped below 43%. Mainers are frustrated. The environment favors Democrats. But discipline is the key word. And nothing I've seen so far tells me discipline is this campaign's strong suit. The second road is that the controversies keep coming. Republicans have barely started their opposition research. The National Republican Senatorial Committee has already promised to expose and destroy his candidacy. If more stories surface, if the sexting allegations expand, if the Reddit posts get turned into television ads that run every 15 minutes from Labor Day to November, Collins wins, and Democrats almost certainly fall short of the majority. The third road, the one some nervous insiders whisper about, is that Plattner steps aside voluntarily before the July deadline. I'll be honest, I don't think that happens. His voters would feel betrayed, and the replacement process would be chaotic at best. But I want you to understand that the fact serious people are even discussing it tells you everything you need to know about how fragile this moment is. But here's what I want to leave you with, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. What happened in Maine on June the 9th was democracy in action. The voters spoke. They chose the candidate who excited them, who made them feel heard, who promised to fight the billionaire class and stand up for working people. That is democracy working exactly the way it's supposed to. And I will never criticize the American people for making their choice. But democracy also asks us to be honest with ourselves about what comes next. Excitement wins primaries. Discipline wins general elections. And the distance between those two things is where campaigns go to live or die. I learned that lesson the hard way across 2 presidential campaigns and 8 years in the White House. You have to earn every single vote, not just the ones that already love you, but the ones that aren't sure about you yet. The ones that are watching and waiting and deciding whether you're serious enough to trust with their future. Democrats have a real path to taking back the Senate in 2026. It is narrow, it is fragile, and it demands that every single candidate on this map, in Maine, in North Carolina, in Ohio, in Alaska, in Georgia, runs like their race is the one that decides everything, because it might be. The American people deserve a Senate that works for them. They deserve leaders who show up not just with passion, but with the preparation and the character to govern once they get there. That's what I believe. That's what I've always believed. And I still believe this country has the capacity to get it right, but only if we're willing to do the hard, honest work that democracy demands of all of us.
Okay, well, let me see where my likes at. All down. Ready for bed. All down. Ready for bed. Y'all hit the like button. Okay. Hold on. Let's see what else I got. Hold on. Let's see what he got to say. Hold on.
Or even in a 14-point number.
Hold on. Y'all get the likes up. Hold on.
Now look, You know, folks, in all my years in public life, negotiating budgets, brokering peace in the Balkans, sitting across the table from people who had every reason not to trust each other, I learned one rule that never bends. When you send someone to speak for the United States of America, you let them speak. You back them up. You do not, and I cannot stress this enough, call into a television network while your own vice president is sitting at the table and tell the other side you won't even make it back to your F-ing country. Now look, that's exactly what happened on Sunday, June the 21st in Bergenstock, Switzerland. J.D. Vance opened the Lake Lucerne summit by extending what he called an outstretched hand. He told the Iranians America wanted to turn over a new leaf. And while those words were still hanging in the mountain air, Donald Trump called Fox News and said he'd blow the S out of Iran.
Wow.
Called the Memorandum of Understanding just an offset.
Y'all, please
folks,
hit the
in
like
all my
button.
years in public life, negotiating budgets, brokering peace in the Balkans, sitting across the table from people who had every reason not to trust each other, I learned one rule that never bends. When you send someone to speak for the United States of America, you let them speak. You back them up. You do not, and I cannot stress this enough, call into a television network while your own vice president is sitting at the table and tell the other side you won't even make it back to your F-ing country. Now look, that's exactly what happened on Sunday, June the 21st in Bergenstock, Switzerland. J.D. Vance opened the Lake Lucerne summit by extending what he called an outstretched hand. He told the Iranians America wanted to turn over a new leaf. And while those words were still hanging in the mountain air, Donald Trump called Fox News and said he'd blow the S out of Iran, called the Memorandum of Understanding just an option, and said, I can do whatever I want. Within the hour, Iran's delegation walked out. Now, this isn't just a bad day in diplomacy. This is a structural failure. And we'll come back to exactly why that matters for the deal, for the region, and for America's word in just a moment. Now let me tell you something about what was actually on the table in Switzerland. Because if you don't understand the architecture, you can't understand why the whole thing nearly fell apart. On June the 17th, 2026, the United States and Iran signed a 14-point Memorandum of Understanding, what they're calling the Islamabad MOU. After more than 100 days of war, 13 American service members dead, $100 billion spent, and an oil crisis that pushed crude from $67 a barrel to $120. That MOU committed both sides to a 60-day ceasefire, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz toll-free, with Iran given 30 days to clear mines,
Hey, Sherry.
the return of IAEA nuclear inspectors,
Can you hit the like button for me?
a phased unfreezing of Iranian assets, and, critically, the termination of all military operations, including in Lebanon. The format was unprecedented. 4 parties at one table: the United States, Iran, Qatar, and Pakistan. Not Oman, which had mediated every previous round. Pakistan, the only nuclear-armed Muslim state, brought credibility Tehran needed to discuss enrichment without feeling lectured by the West. Qatar brought its gas relationship with Iran and its hosting of America's largest airbase. Together, They covered both registers, security and economics. J.D. Vance flew into Switzerland on Sunday, June the 21st, alongside Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. The agenda was staggering. Iran's nuclear program, the Strait of Hormuz, billions in frozen assets, sanctions relief, the Lebanon ceasefire, and the creation of oversight mechanisms. Now, when I was negotiating Northern Ireland, I learned that the first 72 hours of any peace process are the most fragile. That's when trust is being tested, not by what people say at the table, but by what their capitals say behind their backs. And we'll come back to that, because what Washington said that Sunday changed everything. Let me walk you through what happened in those 48 hours, because this wasn't one mistake. It was a cascade. First, while Vance was at that table extending what he called an outstretched hand and talking about turning over a new leaf, Donald Trump called Fox News and said, "You close it and you won't have a country. You won't even make it back to your effing country." He called the MOU just an option and said, "I can do whatever I want." He threatened to blow the shit out of Iran and even said he better watch his mouth, referring to Iran's president. Second, within the hour, Iran's chief negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, fired back on X, calling Trump's threats a sign of American desperation. He said, if their threats had any effect, they wouldn't have reached the point of desperation they are in today. Iranian state media reported the talks entered a difficult phase after what they called an insulting message by the U.S. president. The Iranian delegation left the negotiating site. Third, a clip went viral showing Qatar's prime minister appearing to walk past Vance without greeting him, choosing instead to shake hands with Pakistan's prime minister. A U.S. official scrambled to tell Fox News it was complete nonsense, but the optics circled the globe. Fourth, on Saturday, June the 20th, the day before talks, the IRGC announced the Strait of Hormuz was closed again, citing Israeli ceasefire violations in Lebanon. Maritime data from windward showed transits dropping from 35 ships to 12 within a single day. Fifth, before boarding the plane, Vance told reporters Lebanon had calmed down. That same day, Israeli strikes had killed 83 people in Lebanon. 83. Sixth, Netanyahu declared Israel would maintain a security zone in southern Lebanon indefinitely. 600 square kilometers, 6% of the country. Turkey's foreign minister Hakan Fidan warned Israel was ready to sabotage the agreement. Seventh, back home, this wasn't just Democrats raising alarms. Republican Senator John Cornyn said the deal lacked significant Iranian concessions. Senator Bill Cassidy called it the worst foreign policy blunder in decades. Susan Rice called the move a jaw-dropping, horrific surrender document. And Lindsey Graham openly predicted the diplomacy would fail and said Trump would seize Hormuz by force. Now here's where I need to speak from experience, because this is a failure I have seen destroy diplomatic processes. When you send your vice president across the Atlantic, your number two, the man who carries the seal of the United States, you have made a decision. You have decided that this person speaks with your authority. That is the covenant. And when J.D. Vance sat down at Bergenstock and said, we want to turn over a new leaf, he wasn't improvising. He was delivering the position of the United States government. And then, at that very moment, the President of the United States called into a television network and said the exact opposite. He called the MOU just an option. He threatened to destroy the other side's country. He said, I can do whatever I want. Let me tell you something. When I was working on Camp David with Arafat and Barak, there were days I wanted to throw a chair through a window. But we never, and I mean never, let daylight show between the president and the negotiating team. Disagreements happen behind closed doors. The person at the table had to have credibility, because if the other side thinks your negotiator can be overruled by a phone call on cable television, they're not negotiating with him anymore. They're not negotiating with anyone. They're waiting. And that's exactly what Iran did. They walked out, not because of Vance, because of the man who sent him. That is a governance failure of the first order. Your vice president isn't just your emissary. He is the embodiment of whether your word means anything. And on Sunday, June the 21st, America's word didn't mean much at all. Now let me broaden the lens, because this isn't just about one bad weekend. This is about something that takes decades to build and moments to destroy, and that's institutional credibility. When the world watched J.D. Vance get publicly contradicted by his own president during live peace talks, it sent a message to every capital on earth. Allies in the Gulf, Qatar, Pakistan, the mediators who staked their own reputations on this process, learned that an American commitment can be reversed by a Fox News phone call. Iran's negotiators learned that the person sitting across from them does not actually speak for the United States. And every future adversary learned that if you just wait long enough, Washington will undercut itself. We've been here before. In 2018, Trump pulled the United States out of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that took years to build, years of trust with European allies, years of quiet diplomacy. That withdrawal told the world American agreements are temporary. Now, 8 years later, the world has watched something arguably worse. Not just the breaking of a deal, but the breaking of coherence within a single negotiating session. The Special Eurasia analysis put it plainly. The central risk to the Bergenstock process is not the nuclear track. It's the disconnect between U.S. diplomatic commitments and Israeli operational priorities, compounded by the disconnect between the president and his own vice president. That damage compounds. When Pakistan's army chief spent 100 days shuttling between Washington and Tehran to keep this process alive, he did so on the assumption that the American side could deliver. When Qatar's prime minister showed up at that table, he wagered his credibility. Every mediator now has to ask, can I trust that the next American handshake will hold? And right now, the honest answer is, nobody knows. Now, I'm not one for palace intrigue, but I've been around politics long enough to know that what happened in Switzerland wasn't just diplomatic malpractice. It had a political dimension that we cannot ignore. J.D. Vance is widely understood to be positioning for 2028. The Associated Press has already written about the jockeying between him and Marco Rubio for the Republican nomination. Trump himself told Fox News that Vance would probably be favored to secure it. And Switzerland was supposed to be Vance's statesmanship moment. The scene where the vice president steps onto the world stage, brokers progress, and comes home looking like a leader ready for the Oval Office. Instead, he was publicly humiliated. His own president contradicted him on live television. A viral clip showed a world leader apparently walking past him. Iran's negotiators left the room, and he came back to Washington having to explain how great progress happened in a session that nearly collapsed. Now, in my experience, leaders who feel the shadow of their successors sometimes do things, consciously or not, that diminish them. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying the pattern is not unfamiliar. But the deeper problem is what this reveals about the Republican Party itself. You have Cornyn and Cassidy calling the deal a blunder. You have Graham predicting its failure and promising military seizure. You have Rubio saying he's not sure you can reach a deal with these guys. And you have the president simultaneously threatening to destroy Iran and claiming great progress. This is a party that cannot decide whether it wants peace or confrontation, and a president who appears to want both simultaneously, depending on which camera is pointed at him. So where does this go? Let me be honest. I've seen enough of these processes to know that chaos doesn't always kill a deal. Sometimes the technical people manage to build something real while the political noise rages above them. And there are real achievements to point to. After 18 hours of marathon talks, the mediators announced a roadmap, a 60-day timeline, a high-level committee for political oversight, working groups on nuclear issues, sanctions, and dispute resolution, a deconfliction cell for Lebanon, and a communication line for the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi called it major progress. Vance said IAEA inspectors would return to verify compliance. The foundation, however shaky, exists. But the structural problems haven't been solved. Israel remains in southern Lebanon, occupying 600 square kilometers. Hezbollah and the IDF continue exchanging fire. Iran's closure of Hormuz, even if disputed by CENTCOM, which reported 55
Y'all hit
ships
the
on
like
Saturday,
button.
but saw that drop to
491
12
people
by
in here.
Sunday,
Hit the like button.
sends a signal. And Trump's public threats make every next round of talks harder because Iran's negotiators
I
now
don't
have
need
to answer
400
the
and some
hard.
people in here if y'all can't hit the like button. I'd rather you leave. 473, come on, hit the like button. Double tap the face on your phone that you're listening in on, or hit those three dots at the top right corner. Or go ahead and leave for me. clear former President Bill Clinton is paying close attention to Trump's administration is doing. People are allowing Trump to destroy America. Don't make me stop again, y'all. I'm going to end it.
Miners at home who will say, see, they were never serious. I see three scenarios. First, the technical teams make quiet progress. Be honest. I've seen enough of these processes to know that chaos doesn't always kill a deal. Sometimes the technical people manage to build something real while the political noise rages above them. And there are real achievements to point to. After 18 hours of marathon talks, the mediators announced a roadmap, a 60-day timeline, a high-level committee for political oversight, working groups on nuclear issues, sanctions, and dispute resolution, a deconfliction cell for Lebanon, and a communication line for the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi called it major progress. Vance said IAEA inspectors would return to verify compliance. The foundation, however shaky, exists. But the structural problems haven't been solved. Israel remains in southern Lebanon, occupying 600 square kilometers. Hezbollah and the IDF continue exchanging fire. Iran's closure of Hormuz, even if disputed by CENTCOM, which reported 55 ships on Saturday, but saw that drop to 12 by Sunday, sends a signal. And Trump's public threats make every next round of talks harder because Iran's negotiators now have to answer to hardliners at home who will say, see, they were never serious. I see three scenarios. First, the technical teams make quiet progress despite the noise. The IAEA gets back in, enrichment discussions advance, and a fragile framework deal emerges within 60 days. Possible, but it requires message discipline that this administration has not demonstrated. Second, another Israeli escalation in Lebanon, which U.S. intelligence agencies themselves believe is likely, causes Iran to walk away entirely. The deconfliction cell fails. Hormuz shuts for real. Oil spikes, and we're back to confrontation. Third, and this is what worries me most, the 60-day window expires without a final deal, and we drift toward what Lindsey Graham openly predicted, a military seizure of the Strait of Hormuz. The most likely path, I'm afraid, is a messy middle. Some progress, constant crises, and a deal that remains fragile by design because it was negotiated under chaos. You know, at the end of the day, this isn't about Donald Trump or J.D. Vance or even Iran. It's about something more fundamental. It's about whether American democracy still produces the foreign policy worthy of the country. The idea that the most consequential peace negotiation in a generation can be derailed by one man's phone call to a cable news network, that tells you something about where we are. It tells you that foreign policy has been concentrated in a single personality rather than in the professional, institutional process that made America the most trusted negotiator on earth for 70 years. When I sat with the parties in Northern Ireland, or when we managed the Dayton Accords, the strength of America wasn't just military. It was the fact that when an American official made a promise, the world believed it. That belief didn't come from one president. It came from institutions, the State Department, the intelligence community, the diplomatic corps, the bipartisan consensus then America's word is America's bond. What happened in Switzerland is a symptom of a deeper problem. The stakes are real. Over 3,000 people killed in the renewed Lebanon campaign. A global oil supply hanging by a thread. A potential nuclear crisis. 13 American service members who gave their lives. These are not abstractions. These are lives. These are consequences. And here's the honest truth. Despite everything, I still believe America can get this right. The roadmap exists. The mediators are serious. The technical teams are capable. But it requires something this moment is sorely lacking: coherence, accountability, and respect for the people we send to negotiate on our behalf. Right now, I'm not sure the world trusts us. And I'll tell you something. I'm not sure our own vice president trusts the man who sent him there. And that, my friends, is a problem bigger than any deal.
Right. Oh, not this one. Hold on.
You know, folks, I want you to pick.
I seen this one. Hold on. Dang it, so now I don't know which one I don't watch. Hold on. Before that one.
Every once in a while, something happens that stops you in your tracks. Not because of who won or who lost, but because of how the most powerful person in the country chose to respond to it. On the night of June 23, 2026, Congressman Dan Goldman lost his Democratic primary in New York's 10th Congressional District. Brad Lander, the former city controller, beat him decisively, 65-34. Now that's a significant result, and we'll talk about why it happened. But here's what caught my attention. Within hours, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, went on Truth Social and wrote, and I want you to hear the exact words: "Weak and pathetic Congressman Dan Goldman just lost. Big. I guess people didn't like him illegally targeting President Trump. In any event, this jerk is finally gone." Now let me tell you something. When I was president, political opponents of mine lost races. Some of them had been real thorns in my side. But I never, not once, took to a public platform to call a sitting congressman weak, pathetic, and a jerk on the night of his defeat. And there's a reason for that. The presidency is not a scoreboard. It's a trust. And the story behind why Trump was celebrating, it goes back years to an impeachment, a sarcastic endorsement, and a rivalry that reveals exactly how our politics got to this place. Stick with me, because the details matter more than you might think. Now, to understand why the President of the United States is celebrating at 1 o'clock in the morning on Truth Social, you've got to understand who Dan Goldman is and where this story really starts. Dan Goldman was born in Washington, D.C. in 1976, heir to the Levi Strauss fortune, educated at Yale and Stanford Law. But what matters here isn't the money, it's the career. Goldman spent a decade as a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York under Preet Bharara. He went after Russian organized crime, Genovese mobsters, securities fraud, serious, dangerous work. Then, in early 2019, the House Intelligence Committee hired him as their lead counsel to investigate the President of the United States. And here's where it gets personal. Goldman ran the first impeachment inquiry against Donald Trump, the Ukraine matter, the phone call with President Zelensky, the pressure campaign to dig up dirt on Joe Biden. Goldman questioned the witnesses. He directed the strategy. He oversaw the 300-page report. And on December 18th, 2019, the House voted to impeach Trump on 2 charges: abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The Senate acquitted him on February 5th, 2020, 52-48. But here's the thing people forget. Goldman was the face of that prosecution. Millions of Americans watched him on live television, methodically laying out the case. And from that moment forward, Donald Trump never forgot his name. Goldman went from prosecutor to permanent target, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Because what Trump did next was not what anyone expected. Now here's where this story takes a turn that most people don't know about. In August of 2022, Goldman was running in the Democratic primary for New York's 10th district, a wide open seat, crowded field. And on the night of August 17th, Donald Trump went on Truth Social and wrote, and I'm quoting, "It is my great honor to strongly endorse Dan Goldman." He called him honorable, fair, and highly intelligent. He said Goldman would be very compassionate and compromising to those within the Republican Party. Now look, if you read those words carefully, you see what's happening. That's not an endorsement. That's a hand grenade tossed into a Democratic primary. And it worked exactly as intended. Goldman's opponents, Yuleen New, Mondaire Jones, Joanne Simon, they pounced, treating the endorsement as though it were sincere. Suddenly, the debate wasn't about health care or housing. The word Trump was said 14 times at the very next debate. Goldman fired back that Trump was trying to meddle in this election. His campaign said the former president was living rent-free in Goldman's head. But the damage was done. The conversation had shifted. Goldman still won that primary with about 26% in that fractured field. And once he got to Congress, he became one of Trump's loudest critics, pushing for the Epstein files, demanding subpoenas for Bondi and Kash Patel, calling for the 25th Amendment, slamming the Iran deal. He said Goldman would be very compassionate to strongly endorse Dan Goldman. He called him honorable, fair, and highly intelligent. He said Goldman would be very compassionate and compromising to those within the Republican Party. Now look, if you read those words carefully, you see what's happening. That's not an endorsement. That's a hand grenade tossed into a Democratic primary. And it worked exactly as intended. Goldman's opponents, Yuleen New, Mondaire Jones, Joanne Simon, they pounced, treating the endorsement as though it were sincere. Suddenly, the debate wasn't about health care or housing. The word Trump was said 14 times at the very next debate. Goldman fired back that Trump was trying to meddle in this election. His campaign said the former president was living rent-free in Goldman's head. But the damage was done. The conversation had shifted. Goldman still won that primary with about 26% in that fractured field. And once he got to Congress, he became one of Trump's loudest critics, pushing for the Epstein files, demanding subpoenas for Bondi and Kash Patel, calling for the 25th Amendment, slamming the Iran deal. He never let up, and Trump never forgot. So when Goldman lost his primary on June 23, 2026, 65-34 against Brad Lander, Trump didn't just notice, he celebrated. And that tells you everything about how this rivalry was never about policy. It was personal. Let me tell you something about leadership. It's not enough to be right. You've got to be present. You've got to listen. And you've got to keep earning the trust of the people who sent you there. Nobody hands you a seat forever. I learned that the hard way more than once. Now, Dan Goldman did a lot of things right. He stood up during the impeachment when standing up wasn't easy. He went to Congress and pushed hard on the Epstein files, subpoenaing Pam Bondi and Kash Patel when his own party's leadership was cautious. He called for the 25th Amendment when the president's behavior during the Iran crisis alarmed even members of the military. That takes real courage. But here's the honest truth. Goldman's greatest vulnerability wasn't Donald Trump. It was his own district. New York's 10th is progressive, deeply so. And the war in Gaza reshaped the political landscape there in ways Goldman didn't fully reckon with. He refused to call what was happening a genocide. He defended his AIPAC support. Just days before the election, a Brooklyn coffee shop publicly banned him, calling him a genocide enabler. Whether you agree with that or not, when a neighborhood institution turns on you that publicly, it tells you something about the ground beneath your feet. Brad Lander understood that terrain. He had Mayor Mamdani, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. He'd been arrested at an immigration court defending deportees. Goldman had Jeffries and Hochul and Labor, serious endorsements. But in a progressive primary, the energy wasn't with the establishment. And here's what matters most. Trump didn't beat Goldman. Goldman's district did. But Trump claimed the credit. And that's the real danger of this whole story. We'll get into why that matters next. We've got to remember something about Dan Goldman that goes beyond any single election. This is a man who personally prosecuted the case for impeaching a president and then served in the same Congress alongside allies of that very president. That's extraordinary. His presence in the House was a living reminder that accountability is possible, that you can hold the most powerful person in the world to account and still show up to work the next day. Now, with Goldman gone, that institutional memory takes a hit. Not because Brad Lander can't be effective. He may well be. But because of the message Donald Trump is sending by celebrating this outcome. The message is simple and it's chilling. If you come after me, I will outlast you. I will mock you on the way out. And I will claim your defeat as my victory. Here's the honest truth. That kind of message has consequences far beyond one congressional district. It discourages the next young prosecutor from stepping forward. It makes the next oversight council think twice. It tells the next public servant that there's a permanent political price for doing your constitutional duty. And that is corrosive to the very foundation of democratic accountability. Now, I also want to be fair about what happened inside the Democratic Party here. The progressive challenge to Goldman was driven largely by the war in Gaza and the role of AIPAC. Those are legitimate debates. Voters have every right to hold their representatives accountable on foreign policy. That's democracy working. But when a president can take your party's internal debates and claim them as personal trophies, something has gone wrong with the ecosystem. The accountability structures that are supposed to protect democracy are being turned into ammunition against it. And that should concern every American, regardless of party. Now look, I've been studying political strategy my entire adult life. I've seen hardball politics. I played hardball politics. When Newt Gingrich and I were going at it in the 90s, neither of us was shy about it. But here's the difference. When we were done fighting, we sat down and balanced the budget. We passed welfare reform. We disagreed fiercely, but we governed. The system worked because both sides understood that politics had to produce something for the people, not just victories for ourselves. What Trump has done with Dan Goldman follows a very different playbook, and I want you to see it clearly. Phase 1, identify your most visible critic, the man who prosecuted your impeachment. Phase 2, in 2022, throw a sarcastic endorsement into his Democratic primary to sow chaos and make Democrats fight each other about you instead of about their own ideas. Phase 3, spend years attacking him on Truth Social, through surrogates, whenever he makes news. Phase 4, and this is the part that should worry everyone. When he falls, for reasons that have nothing to do with you, claim the credit. Call him weak and pathetic. Say the people rejected him because of you. That is not governance. That is not leadership. That is scorekeeping, and it degrades everything it touches. I also want to say something to my fellow Democrats. When we lose people like Goldman through internal progressive challenges, we have to recognize that Trump will weaponize every single one of those losses. Not because progressives are wrong to challenge incumbents. That's how democracy works. But we have to be strategic about how we manage our debates when a president is standing at the window watching for every crack, ready to claim it as proof of his own dominance. And this is where things start to get really complicated for 2026 and beyond. Now let me look ahead, because this story doesn't end on election night. Let me walk through what I think is likely to unfold. First, Brad Lander will almost certainly win that general election in November. New York's 10th is one of the bluest districts in America. Goldman won his general in 2024 with 82%. Lander will bring progressive energy, real credibility on immigration, and he'll carry Mayor Mamdani's coalition into Congress. That could be a very good thing. We need representatives who fight hard against this administration's worst instincts. But here's my concern. Trump will continue to use the Goldman narrative as proof of his reach, evidence that anyone who takes him on gets destroyed eventually. That chilling message extends far beyond one district in Brooklyn. Every future prosecutor, every oversight council, every young lawyer thinking about stepping into public service, they'll remember how this chapter ended and how the president responded. Second, the progressive movement within our party is gaining real momentum. Mamdani's candidates swept 3 primaries that night. That energy is genuine, and much of it is healthy, pushing us on healthcare,
You are
corporate
right.
power, immigration.
NY Iris.
But if it becomes a series of purity tests that shrink our tent rather than expand it, we'll hand the 2028 election to whoever the Republicans nominate. We've got to remember, the question isn't whether Democrats can win their own primaries. It's whether we can win the country.
Right.
And that requires the kind of coalition building that holds room for disagreement without demanding total conformity. I spent 8 years in the White House learning that lesson. It's the hardest thing in politics, keeping people together who don't agree on everything,
Right.
but who share a commitment to making this country work. That's the test ahead. Let me close with this. I've been thinking about something I've carried with me since my years in the White House. American democracy was designed for disagreement. The founders knew we'd argue about taxes, about wars, about who should lead. They built a system strong enough to hold all of that tension. But they did not build it for vendettas. They did not build it so that a president could use the highest office in the land as a personal scoreboard.
Right.
When I sat behind that desk in the Oval Office, I learned something that stays with me to this
Hi,
day.
Danita.
The presidency is not measured by how many enemies you outlast.
Hi, Ronald.
It's measured by how many lives you improve. The moment any president, Democrat or Republican, uses their platform to call a sitting congressman weak, pathetic, and a jerk on the night of his defeat, the office itself is diminished. Not the person who lost, the office. Now, Dan Goldman's service was imperfect. Whose isn't? But it was genuine. He stood up when it counted. And I want to welcome Brad Lander to the fight, because the work of holding power accountable doesn't stop. It just passes to new hands. And to the president, I'll say this gently, but I'll say it clearly. History does not remember presidents for their scoreboards. It remembers them for their stewardship, for what they built, not what they tore down, for the people they lifted, not the rivals they mocked. And to all of you watching, don't let anyone convince you that democracy is a game with winners and losers. It's a responsibility.
Bye. Don't come back, okay? Yeah. Go on.
Republican uses their platform to call a sitting congressman weak, pathetic, and a jerk on the night of his defeat, the office itself is diminished. Not the person who lost, the office. Now, Dan Goldman's service was imperfect. Whose isn't? But it was genuine. He stood up when it counted. And I want to welcome Brad Lander to the fight, because the work of holding power accountable doesn't stop. It just passes to new hands. And to the president, I'll say this gently, but I'll say it clearly. History does not remember presidents for their scoreboards. It remembers them for their stewardship, for what they built, not what they tore down, for the people they lifted, not the rivals they mocked. And to all of you watching, don't let anyone convince you that democracy is a game with winners and losers. It's a responsibility we all share. Every vote, every act of service, every moment of civic courage. The moment we forget that, we've already lost something no election can ever give back. Now look, I want you to listen to me carefully for a minute. Because what's happening right now between the United States and Iran isn't just another news cycle. This is one of those moments.
This gonna be it,
and
y'all.
I've seen a few of them, where what the American people are being told and what is actually taking place are two very different things. And in a democracy, that gap is where trust goes to die. We just came through 110 days of war. The Strait of Hormuz, where a fifth of the world's oil passes through, was shut down for the first time since the 1970s energy crisis. 11,000 sailors were stranded. Oil hit $126 a barrel. Ships were attacked, mines were laid, and a supreme leader was killed. This was not a small thing. And now we have a 14-point memorandum of understanding signed June the 17th that's supposed to end all of that. And I want to be fair. Pursuing peace is always the right instinct. I've spent my life believing that. But here's the honest truth. I've also learned that the most dangerous moment in any negotiation isn't when two sides disagree. It's when both sides walk out of the room, stand in front of cameras, and describe a completely different deal. Today, the president says Iran has fully and completely agreed to highest level nuclear inspections into infinity. Iran's foreign ministry says there are no such plans. The president says unfrozen assets will buy American corn and wheat. Iran's central bank governor says Tehran decides how to spend its own money. And while all of that is playing out on social media, an armada of tankers loaded with $6 billion of Iranian crude is sailing toward China, South Korea, and Japan. Every drop purchased and claimed. And we'll come back to that, because who actually benefits from this deal is the question that should keep every American up tonight. Now I have all the information I need. Let me write parts 2 through 8, each at approximately 1,700 characters. Let me begin. Now let me take you back a little, because this didn't come out of thin air. On February the 28th, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, coordinated airstrikes on Iran that killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. And within days, Iran retaliated with missiles on Israeli cities and American bases across the Gulf. By March the 4th, the Strait of Hormuz, a waterway where 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas flows, was declared closed by the Revolutionary Guard. Ships were attacked, mines were laid, a tugboat sank with 4 crew dead. Oil surged past $126 a barrel, the largest disruption to world energy supply since the 1970s. Let me tell you something. I remember managing crises in the 90s, from Bosnia to North Korea. And one thing you learn very quickly is that when a president starts a military operation without a realistic exit plan, everything that follows becomes reactive. The Joint Chiefs warned President Trump before the February strikes that Iran could close the strait. He dismissed it, said they'd capitulate. They didn't. And for 110 days, 20,000 mariners and 2,000 ships were stranded in the Persian Gulf. By May, the House passed the War Powers Resolution, 215 to 208, with 4 Republicans crossing over. The Senate advanced it 50 to 47. Collins, Murkowski, Paul, and Cassidy voting with Democrats. That's not nothing. When members of a president's own party start voting to end his war, that tells you something about the exhaustion in the system. This ceasefire, signed June the 17th in Islamabad, it didn't emerge from a position of American strength. It emerged because everybody was tired. And tired negotiations produce sloppy deals. We've got to remember that, because what comes next depends on whether this deal was built on truth or on wishful thinking. Now, here's where things start to get complicated, and I want to walk through this carefully, because the American people deserve to understand what they're actually being told and what's actually happening. Claim number one, the president posted on Truth Social that Iran has, and I'm quoting, fully and completely agreed to highest level nuclear inspections long into the future. Infinity, exclamation points and all. Within hours, Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Esmail Baghai said there were no new commitments and no protocol for such inspections. The IAEA hasn't inspected the 3 key nuclear sites struck by the U.S. since June of 2025. And according to the agency itself, Iran had 440 kilograms, about 972 pounds of uranium enriched up to 60% purity before the strikes. That's a short.
What's your point? What does that have to do with what's going on right now in the country?
Grade. A top Iranian official confirmed.
You people always moving the goalposts. Y'all can't never stay on topic. We're talking about what's going on right now.
Claim number
if
two.
You can't stay on right now, then go ahead and leave.
Unfrozen Iranian funds will go exclusively to buy American food, corn, wheat, soybeans.
That's okay, I'll help you out.
91 million people. Iran's central bank governor, Abdel Nasser Hemati, responded the same day. Tehran is under no obligation to purchase agricultural inputs from the United States. The Memorandum of Understanding doesn't contain this restriction. Claim number three. The president hailed 19 million barrels flowing through Hormuz in one day as proof the deal works. But maritime intelligence shows roughly 25 vessels passing in a 12-hour window, compared to 100 to 130 per day before the war. And here's the buried headline. The Treasury issued a 60-day license allowing Iran to produce, transport, and sell oil. An armada of tankers loaded with Iranian crude is heading to China, South Korea, and Japan. Every drop purchased by East Asia, not one barrel headed for American refineries. Let me tell you something about how diplomacy is supposed to work. When I negotiated the Dayton Agreement to end the war in Bosnia in 1995, we didn't announce the deal on a social media platform before the ink was dry. We verified, we cross-referenced, we made sure that when the President of the United States said something in public, the other side wasn't going to contradict it within the hour. That's not style, that's substance. Because once your adversary publicly denies your public claim, every ally listening recalibrates their trust. What we've seen this past week is a pattern. Vice President Vance announces in Switzerland that Iran has agreed to major weapons inspections and calls it a major milestone. Hours later, Iran denies it. When pressed, Vance tells reporters to mistrust a little bit what you see coming out of Iranian social media. Now look,
Wow.
I understand the impulse to frame your opponent's denials as propaganda. But when the IAEA itself hasn't inspected those sites in a year, you can't just wish verification into existence. Then there's the congressional dimension. Republican senators, not Democrats, their own party, Ted Cruz called it giving billions of dollars to lunatics. Bill Cassidy compared it to the JCPOA and called it the worst foreign policy blunder in decades. Tom Tillis said the math doesn't add up. 13 American service members dead, 365 wounded, over $100 billion spent, and no clear Iranian concession on nuclear enrichment. When the president was told senators needed more information, he said they needed to be educated. That's not leadership. That's dismissal. And it's exactly the kind of governance that erodes the partnership between the executive and legislative branches that real diplomacy requires. Now we've got to step back and look at the bigger picture here, because what's happening right now goes beyond any single deal. It goes to the heart of something I spent my entire presidency trying to protect: America's credibility. When the President of the United States says Iran agreed to nuclear inspections into infinity, and Iran's foreign ministry denies it on the same day, every government on earth takes note. Our allies in Europe, our partners in Asia, every nation sitting at the United Nations, they're all asking the same question: can America be trusted to describe its own agreements accurately? And if the answer is no, even partially, then the foundation of American diplomatic leadership starts to crack. The Senate War Powers votes tell their own story. For the first time in this conflict, a bipartisan majority advanced the resolution to end hostilities 50 to 47. That is Congress saying, in the clearest institutional language it has, that this war was never properly authorized, and its conduct has not earned legislative confidence. Republican senators who reviewed the MOU say it doesn't clearly prohibit Iran from levying tolls on the Strait of Hormuz beyond 60 days. It doesn't address Iran's missile program. And a classified CIA assessment found Iran retains 70% of its pre-war missile stockpile. These aren't Democratic talking points. These are concerns from the president's own party. And here's what worries me most. Credibility once damaged takes a generation to rebuild. I saw what happened when allies doubted American commitments during difficult periods in the past. It changes behavior, not in dramatic ways, but in quiet, corrosive ones. Countries start hedging. They build alternative alliances. They stop returning calls as quickly. And that's exactly what's happening now. This is the question at the center of everything. And it's the one the title of this video asks directly. China took every drop of Iran's oil. Let me explain why that matters more than most people realize. Before this war, China was already buying over 90% of Iran's oil exports, more than 1.5 million barrels a day. During the conflict, China cut imports by roughly a third, but not because they didn't have access. They'd been stockpiling for years. Their strategic reserves were nearly full. Their refinery tanks were brimming. China was better prepared for this war than we were, and they didn't fire a single shot. Now, with the Treasury's 60-day sanctions waiver, Iran can produce, transport, and sell oil freely. And where is it going? An armada of tankers is sailing to East Asia. The New York Times reported that China isn't even expected to ramp up purchases quickly because they don't need to. They're already sitting on full tanks. Meanwhile, South Korea and Japan are replenishing reserves depleted during the crisis, buying Iranian crude at what will likely be discounted prices. So let's do the balance of accounts, as Senator Tillis put it. America spent over $100 billion, lost 13 service members, saw gas prices double, endured a bipartisan congressional rebellion, and the strategic outcome is that China gets energy security, Iran gets sanctions relief, and keeps its enriched uranium, and American farmers were promised purchases that Iran publicly rejected. On top of that, the Russian oil sanctions waiver expired on June the 17th, the same day the MOU was signed, further shifting global energy flows toward Beijing. The deal sold as America First is, in practice, fueling China's strategic position. And we'll come back to why that trajectory matters when we look at what happens next. Now let me lay out where I think this goes, because any deal is only as good as what follows it. And there are three realistic paths from here. Scenario one, the deal holds. Iran gradually allows limited inspections, the strait stays open, and a comprehensive agreement emerges within 60 days. Even Treasury Secretary Besant conditioned the oil waiver on Iran allowing free and open transit and agreeing to inspections. But Iran has already denied both commitments publicly. Even in its best case, the nuclear question remains unresolved, and China's energy leverage grows. I give this the lowest probability, but I hope I'm wrong. Scenario two, the deal frays. This is what I think is most likely. Israel's prime minister has publicly stated the IDF will not leave Lebanon, directly contradicting Iran's core demand. Iran's president is in Pakistan right now calling for a new regional security architecture that explicitly excludes the United States. The strait was briefly reclosed by Iran over the weekend after continued Israeli operations in Lebanon. The deconflicting cell agreed to in Switzerland is untested. The 60-day window could expire without a comprehensive deal. And by then, Iran will have sold billions in oil and replenished its treasury. The leverage shifts entirely. Scenario three, escalation returns. Netanyahu openly refuses to withdraw from Lebanon, Iran recloses the strait, or the IAEA confirms Iran has crossed a nuclear threshold with that uranium buried at Isfahan. The War Powers Resolution proved Congress doesn't support continuing its conflict. The president would face a constitutional question and a military credibility gap simultaneously. And every month that passes without verified inspections is a month closer to a nuclear-armed Iran. We've got to be honest about that possibility, even if nobody wants to hear it. Let me close with this. Seeking peace with Iran is not wrong. I want to be crystal clear about that.
Yeah, we talking about what's going on right now.
Any American president who reaches across one of the most dangerous divides in the world and tries to end the war That instinct deserves respect. I've spent my life believing that diplomacy is better than conflict. But the way you pursue peace matters as much as the pursuit itself. Because a deal built on contradictions will collapse under its own weight. Real diplomacy requires verification before celebration. It requires congressional partnership, not dismissal. It requires honest communication with the American people, not claims on social media that your own negotiating partner denies within hours. And it requires strategic awareness of who actually benefits from the agreement you've struck. Right now, China is fueling its economy with Iranian oil. Iran is rebuilding its treasury with sanctions relief. And America is left holding a memorandum that its own Republican senators call the worst foreign policy blunder in decades. We've got to remember something. In a democracy, the people have a right to know the truth, the real terms, the real contradictions, the real costs, not a version designed to sound like victory. 13 families lost someone in this war. Americans paid double at the pump for months. And the question every citizen should be asking is, what did we actually get? Here's what I believe, though. America has corrected course before. We did it after Vietnam, after Iraq, after moments when our institutions were tested and our credibility was strained. We can do it again, but only if citizens demand honesty from their leaders and accountability from their institutions. The strength of this country has never been one person. It's always been the system, the checks, the balances, the idea that we're all in this together. That's what I'm asking you to protect. Not a party, not a president, the system itself.
Okay, one more.
You know, folks, most
not this
people
one.
scrolled right past.
And all of them are also missing the more important point, because Lebanon did. Okay, so Thursday evening, June 19th, 2026, J.D. Vance's entire delegation is physically assembled at Joint Base Andrews outside Washington. Bags are packed, plane is ready, dozens of White House officials, advanced staff, and a pool of journalists have already flown ahead to Switzerland and are sitting in a mountainside resort in Obergen, near Lucerne, waiting for Vance to arrive. The whole apparatus of American
I think I want to hear this one.
Enhance your membership with the American Express Platinum Card and access over $3,500 in annual value.
Something happened in the last few weeks that most Western analysts completely missed. And I say that not to be provocative, but because I've been watching the pieces fall into place for months. And when the final move came, even I had to sit with it for a moment before fully grasping what it meant. A deal was struck, not announced with fanfare, not celebrated at a press conference with handshakes and flags. It was a kind of deal that powerful men make in rooms we are never invited into. The kind that only reveals itself in what happens asterisk, afterward asterisk, in who goes silent, in who starts screaming, in which capitals begin to sweat. And here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. The country most shaken by this deal is not the one you'd expect. It is not Iran. It is not the United States. It is not even Saudi Arabia, though Riyadh is watching very carefully. The country most shaken by this deal is Russia. And the second most shaken, Israel. Now, before you close this video, thinking this is going to be another shallow take on Middle East politics, I want to make you a promise. Everything I'm about to tell you is grounded in history, in documented geopolitical logic, and in the hard mechanics of power. I am not going to speculate wildly. I'm going to walk you step by step through the architecture of what just happened, why it happened now, who made it happen, what it costs, and what it means for the next decade of global order. Because this is not just a regional story. This is a story about the unraveling of a world system that has held imperfectly, violently, but held since 1991. And if you want to understand where we are going, you need to understand this moment. So let us begin. The world that built this moment, to understand why this deal is so explosive, you have to understand the world in which it was born. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the United States found itself in a position no great power had occupied since the Roman Empire at its height, absolute, uncontested primacy. And with that primacy came something intoxicating and dangerous, the belief that American power could be extended indefinitely, that history had ended, that liberal democracy and the market economy had won, and that the job now was simply to manage the victory. For the Middle East, this meant a very specific architecture of power. The United States would be the supreme guarantor of regional security. It would maintain the flow of oil. It would protect the Gulf monarchies. It would contain Iran. And critically, it would provide the security umbrella under which Israel could exist and over time expand its reach without existential fear. Russia, in its design, was an afterthought. A humiliated, economically broken former superpower that had lost its empire, lost its ideology, and was losing its population. Russia's role in the Middle East after 1991 was vestigial. A few old relationships, some arms deals, some nostalgia. Nothing strategic, nothing decisive. China was not even in the picture. China in 1991 was still a developing country, still digesting the trauma of Tiananmen, still building the manufacturing base that would eventually make it the world's largest economy. China had no meaningful presence in the Middle East, no alliances, no leverage, no ambition, or at least no visible ambition. This was the world that shaped every assumption that Israeli strategists, American planners, and Gulf monarchs operated within for 30 years. American primacy was the fixed point around which everything else rotated. But fixed points do not last forever in history. They never do. The first great crack appeared on September 11, 2001. Not because Al-Qaeda was capable of destroying American power, it was not, but because of what America did in response. The invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq were not just military failures, they were strategic catastrophes that revealed something the world had not fully understood, that American power, for all its might, could be bled, that it could be drawn into wars it could not win, that it had limits. The second crack appeared in 2008 when the financial system that underpinned American hegemony nearly collapsed entirely. The moral authority of the American economic model, the Washington Consensus, the gospel of deregulated markets, and dollar dominance took a wound from which it has never fully recovered. The third crack appeared in 2011 when the Arab Spring convulsed the Middle East and the United States. The great guarantor proved unable to shape events, unable to protect its allies in Cairo, unable to determine outcomes in Tripoli, unable to stop the bleeding in Damascus. America could bomb, America could sanction, but America could not govern the chaos it helped unleash. And then in 2022, something happened that shattered the architecture completely. Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, I know what you're thinking. What does Ukraine have to do with Israel? What does Ukraine have to do with the deal I'm describing? The answer is everything. Because the invasion of Ukraine did not just start a war in Eastern Europe. It triggered a cascade of realignments, a forced choosing of sides, a compression of timelines that made the deal I'm about to describe not just possible, but necessary asterisk. The Putin gamble and its unintended consequences, the Putin gamble Vladimir Putin believed in February 2022 that he was making a calculated gamble. He believed the West was too divided. too dependent on Russian energy, and too exhausted from 2 decades of failed wars to mount a serious, sustained response to a Russian takeover of Ukraine. He believed China would support him.
This $10 pen fixed what $1,000 worth of creams couldn't, because this yellow crust is...
Oh, not the yellow crust. I know it's time to go to sleep.
Tacitly, if not openly, he believed the global South would stay neutral. He believed Ukraine would fold in weeks. He was wrong on almost every count. But here's what Putin was asterisk about, and what almost no one in the Western press will acknowledge. The invasion of Ukraine did fundamentally change the global order, just not in the way he intended.
Yeah.
What the Ukrainian war did was force every major power on the planet to make a strategic calculation it had been avoided.
Sorry.
Avoiding. Asterisk. Which world do I want to live in? Asterisk. The American-led unipolar order, which was fraying but still functional, or a multipolar order, chaotic and dangerous, but in which smaller powers have more room to maneuver. For China, the calculation was subtle. Beijing did not want to be seen openly backing Russia. It needed trade with Europe and America, and it could not afford the secondary sanctions that would come from being seen as a direct arms supplier. But China also did not want Russia to lose. A weakened, humiliated Russia that collapsed into chaos, or turned entirely toward the West, would eliminate China's most important strategic partner and leave it alone facing American pressure. So China chose the third path, sustaining Russia economically, diplomatically shielding it at the UN, while maintaining plausible neutrality for the Gulf monarchies, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar. The Ukraine war was clarifying in a very specific way. They watched the United States pressure them to increase oil production to punish Russia, and they said no. They watched the United States threaten them and cajole them and shame them, and they still said no. And in saying no, they discovered something extraordinary. They could defy Washington, and the consequences were manageable. This was a revelation. For Iran, the Ukraine war was an opportunity. Tehran began supplying Russia with Shahed drones, cheap, effective, mass-producible weapons that changed the character of the war in Ukraine's skies. In doing so, Iran demonstrated something crucial, that it could play a direct military role in a conflict against a NATO-backed power on the territory of a European country and survive. The sky did not fall. The sanctions, already maximal, could not get more maximal. And in exchange, Russia, which had previously been ambivalent about Iranian nuclear ambitions, began looking at Tehran with new eyes. For Israel, the Ukraine war created an agonizing dilemma. Israel had deep relationships with both Russia and Ukraine. Tens of thousands of Israeli citizens live in Ukraine. The Russian Jewish community has historically close ties to Israel. Russia controls airspace over Syria that is critical to Israeli military operations against Hezbollah and Iranian supply lines. Israel tried desperately to stay neutral, but neutrality in a world where every major power is choosing sides is not a stable position. It is a position that satisfies no one and earns you enemies on both sides. And then October 7th, 2023 happened. October 7th, and the shattering of Israeli strategy. I want to be very careful here, because the events of October 7th are recent and raw, and because the human suffering on all sides of this conflict is real and profound. I am not going to make light of it. I am not going to instrumentalize it, but I am going to analyze it strategically, because that is what this channel is for. And because the strategic consequences of October 7th are enormous, and they are directly connected to the deal I'm describing. October 7th was, in strategic terms, a catastrophic intelligence failure of historic proportions. Israel, a country whose intelligence apparatus is widely regarded as among the finest in the world, failed to detect the planning and execution of the largest single-day massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust. This failure was not just operational. Israeli strategists had built their assessment of Hamas around the assumption that Hamas was asterisk deterred asterisk, that the cost of a major attack would always outweigh the benefits, and that rational actors in Gaza would never do something so obviously suicidal, they were wrong because they had misunderstood something fundamental. Hamas's calculation was not primarily military. It was political. Hamas attacked not to win a war in the conventional sense, but to shatter a process, the normalization process, the Abraham Accords process, the slow, steady integration of Israel into the Arab world that was reaching its most consequential stage, the potential normalization with Saudi Arabia. If Saudi Arabia normalized relations with Israel, the Palestinian cause would be finished as a live political issue in the Arab world. The Gulf would move on. The money would dry up. The rhetorical solidarity would evaporate. Hamas understood this, and Hamas struck. In that narrow, brutal, tactical sense, Hamas succeeded. The Saudi-Israeli normalization talks collapsed overnight. The Abraham Accords framework, which had been expanding steadily since 2020, was frozen. And Israel was pulled into a war in Gaza that had no clean military solution, a war in tunnels and hospitals and refugee camps, a war that a watching world increasingly described with the word asterisk, genocide, asterisk, a word that, whatever one's view of its legal applicability, carries devastating political and diplomatic weight. Israel's response to October 7th, the military campaign in Gaza, the expansion into Lebanon, the strikes on Iran, was, from a purely military standpoint, often effective. Israel significantly degraded Hezbollah's military capacity. It killed key Hamas leaders. It struck Iranian territory directly for the first time. It demonstrated that it could project power across the region with remarkable precision. But military effectiveness is not the same as strategic success. And here's where Israel began to lose. Every image from Gaza, and there were hundreds of thousands of them, distributed instantly across social media to billions of people, was a political defeat for Israel. Not because the images were fabricated, and not because Israel's enemies were not also guilty of horrific violence, but because the asymmetry of destruction was so visible, so total, and so relentless that it transformed global opinion in ways that no Israeli information operation could reverse. For the first time in decades, the United States faced genuine domestic political pressure, not just from the progressive left, but from the center, from young voters, from Muslim American communities in swing states, over its unconditional support for Israel. And in Washington, political pressure, however uncomfortable, eventually becomes policy. The Biden administration tried to walk the line, providing weapons while calling for humanitarian corridors, supporting Israel rhetorically while voting for ceasefire language at the UN. It satisfied no one. And when Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, the calculation changed it again, but not, as some expected, in a direction that simply reversed everything Biden had done. Because Trump, for all his rhetorical support for Israel, is fundamentally a transactional operator. He wants deals. He wants wins. He wants his name on things. And a deal in the Middle East, the ultimate Asher-Selig deal, the one that reshaped the entire regional order, was available to be made. Enter the deal maker, and the architecture of the new order here is where I need to slow down and be precise, because what I am about to describe is subtle, and subtlety matters in geopolitics. The deal that broke Israel was not a single document signed on a single day. It was a convergence, a simultaneous realignment of multiple actors, each pursuing their own interests that collectively produce an outcome that none of them, but all of them, in retrospect, enabled. Let me walk you through the parties. Asterisk Saudi Arabia, asterisk had been the kingmaker of this moment for years. The potential Saudi-Israeli normalization under Biden was always going to happen on Saudi terms. And Saudi terms were steep, a credible pathway to Palestinian statehood, a formal U.S. security guarantee, and American support for a Saudi civilian nuclear program. Biden couldn't deliver all three. The Palestinian statehood piece, in particular, was a political impossibility in Washington as long as Netanyahu's government, dependent on far-right coalition partners who openly opposed any Palestinian state, was in power. But after October 7th, something shifted in Riyadh's thinking. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, the man who runs Saudi Arabia and who plays a very long game, began to recalculate. He had invested significant political capital in the normalization process. He had signaled to Washington that he was willing to bring the Arab world along, and Hamas had blown it up. MBS was furious, not at Israel exactly, at the situation, at the instability, at the unpredictability, at the sense that the American-led framework he had been betting on was fundamentally unreliable. And so he began to look for a different kind of deal. Not the normalization deal, that was dead, at least for now. A different deal. A deal that gave Saudi Arabia what it actually needed most: security, stability, and strategic optionality. Asterisk, asterisk China, asterisk, asterisk, meanwhile had already made its opening move. In March 2023, a year and a half before the Gaza war reached its full intensity, Beijing had brokered an extraordinary agreement, the restoration of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, two countries that have been in a state of open enmity since 2016, when Riyadh executed a prominent Shia cleric and Iranian mobs attacked Saudi diplomatic missions.
This is the most anticipated smart security camera of the year. No internet connection needed, no wiring or complicated installation, and best of all, it's completely free to use for life.
Two countries whose rivalry had fueled proxy wars across Yemen, Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria. Talking, normalizing, agreeing to restore embassies. The Americans were stunned. The deal had been brokered entirely without U.S. involvement. China had done something Washington had failed to do for decades, brought Iran and Saudi Arabia to the same table. And it had done so not through military power or threats or sanctions, but through economic relationships. Through the simple fact that both Iran and Saudi Arabia depend heavily on Chinese trade and investment. This was the first signal of what was coming. Asterisk, asterisk, Iran, asterisk, asterisk, emboldened by the Chinese brokered deal with Saudi Arabia and emboldened by the performance of its proxy forces in Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq, and emboldened by Russia's survival under sanctions, began to move with new confidence. Tehran accelerated its nuclear enrichment program to levels that were, in technical terms, a screwdriver's turn away from weapons-grade material. It openly discussed its nuclear capabilities in ways it had never done before.
And you asked the question.
It was not,
we don't mind
analysts
answering,
believe,
but you need to
racing
support.
to build a bomb immediately.
Hit the like button.
It was doing something more sophisticated. It was establishing deterrence through ambiguity, making the cost of any military strike against it so high, so uncertain in its consequences, that even Israel, even the United States, would have to think very carefully. Asterisk, asterisk, Russia, asterisk, asterisk, isolated by Western sanctions, dependent on Chinese trade, and deeply invested in maintaining its influence in the Middle East as one of the few remaining arenas where it could project power, found itself in a peculiar position. Moscow had historically good relationships with both Israel and Iran. It had been the silent partner in Syria, the power whose airspace Israel needed to conduct strikes against Iranian targets. After October 7th, that arrangement began to fray. Russia's relationship with Iran deepened militarily, economically, diplomatically, and Russia's relationship with Israel, already complicated by Israeli arms to Ukraine,
That's
grew
okay.
colder.
They need to
But
hit
here's
the
the key
like
thing
button.
about Russia and this deal. Russia is not a party to it. Russia is an asterisk victim asterisk of it. Let me explain why Moscow is burning. For 15 years, from 2010 to roughly 2025, Russia's position in the Middle East rested on a single foundation. Russia was the indispensable power. The Americans and Europeans were unreliable, ideological, and demanding. China was present economically, but absent strategically. And Russia asked no questions about internal politics. Russia sold weapons. Russia provided air cover. Russia maintained relationships with everyone: Iran, Israel, Turkey, Syria, Egypt, the Gulf, and used those relationships to project influence far beyond what Russia's actual economic weight should have allowed. The Syria intervention of 2015 was the masterpiece of this strategy. Russia saved Assad. Russia demonstrated that it could deploy military force effectively in the Middle East. And Russia demonstrated that it was, in the vocabulary of international relations, asterisk, reliable patron asterisk. Unlike America, which had abandoned Mubarak and Gaddafi and was in the process of abandoning its Kurdish allies. This reputation for reliability was Russia's most valuable strategic asset in the region. More valuable than oil, more valuable than its military presence, more valuable than any particular alliance. The deal that I am describing destroyed that asset. Here is how the convergence of Chinese diplomatic engagement, Gulf financial power, Iranian strategic patience, and American transactional deal-making produced in 2025 a framework that I would describe as the New Middle East Compact. It is not a formal treaty, it has no official name, but its contours are visible in the pattern of events Saudi Arabia and the United States have reached an understanding, not a normalization with Israel, but something different, a security architecture in which the United States provides a formal defense guarantee to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia agrees to price a portion of its oil in currencies other than the dollar only, within agreed limits. And the Palestinian issue is managed rather than resolved, with a pathway to statehood that is real but long-term. Iran has reached an understanding through Chinese mediation with Gulf backing that its nuclear ambitions will be constrained to a level just below weaponization in exchange for the lifting of a significant portion of sanctions and economic integration into the Chinese-led trade architecture that is slowly displacing the dollar-denominated Western system. Turkey, which I have not yet mentioned, but which is absolutely central, has positioned itself as the indispensable regional manager, using its NATO membership as cover, while pursuing an entirely independent foreign policy. Erdogan has managed to be simultaneously present in talks with Russia, Iran, the Gulf, and the West, a diplomatic feat that only becomes possible in a multipolar world. And Israel? Israel is the great loser of this compact. Not because anyone set out to destroy Israel. That is not what happened. But because Israel's security model, its entire strategic logic for the past 40 years, depended on a specific set of conditions. American primacy, Arab fragmentation, and Russian strategic marginalization in the region. The New Middle East Compact undermines all three. The Arabs are no longer fragmented. They may disagree with each other. The Gulf and Iran are still rivals. Turkey and the Gulf have complex relationships, but they are all now operating within a framework in which asterisk American power is one option among several, not the only option. Asterisk Russia is not just marginalized, it is being actively squeezed out of the deals that matter. And here is why Moscow is burning. The Russians thought they had built an irreplaceable position in the Middle East. They thought their relationships, their military presence in Syria, their arms sales, their willingness to deal with anyone, they thought all of this gave them a seat at every table. The New Middle East Compact cut them out. The deal between Iran and the Gulf does not require Russian mediation. It was brokered by China. The security architecture between Saudi Arabia and the United States does not include Russia. Turkey's independent positioning does not depend on Russian support. Turkey is strong enough now to stand alone. And even Syria, Assad's Syria, the crown jewel of Russia's Middle Eastern strategy, is finding reasons to hedge, to open channels to the Gulf, to explore a rehabilitation that no longer needs Moscow's blessing. For Putin, this is an existential strategic humiliation. Russia spent 15 years and enormous resources building a Middle Eastern presence. And the payoff, at the moment when a new order is being constructed, is exclusion.
Okay, y'all, good night. Sleep tight.